It was the era of the struggle between good and evil, the struggle between ordinary peaceful people and evil rabid beasts. Each of these people dreamed of entering a martial arts university and wanted to become the strongest person to protect the whole world from evil monsters. And it was always Lee Soo who was the candidate for this role of the strongest man. The girls from his school liked him because he was handsome and the best of their class. But the guy did not even expect that he would face unpredictable events before the high school exam. Why, having already completed 10,000 levels of Chi self-improvement, he still cannot lay the foundation for his ability. The system notified me that the Chi purification had already reached a level that exceeded the boundaries of the control dimension. Of all of them, he was the only one left at the stage of Chi purification, because all the other classes were basically already at the stage of forming the foundation itself. Lee Soo was mocked by his peers, pointing fingers as he walked down the school corridors, and no one could have imagined that their number one before the entrance exams would become just garbage. They did not know what good it would do to lay the foundation if Soo himself was beneath them. This news quickly spread within the school, and everyone who heard it was very surprised because they could not believe that this guy was now showing such a bad result. But the arrival of evil forces always comes unexpectedly and at the worst possible moment, and a new danger was looming over the world. Their school has just received information that there is a suspicion that followers of the Jormungand Order are operating in this city. It was the last straw and they could not wait any longer. The principal ordered to immediately prepare for the first level of danger. An unknown danger was approaching, and the girl, whose body resembled a lifeless one, was still being saved by magic. Everyone came to the scene, including the teachers and nurses. It was said that inferior beings would never have as much power as superior ones. These were the rules and laws of the world, but Soo categorically refused to believe in them. He trained hard and did everything he could to become better, and he also went through something terrible, through 1,000 levels of self-improvement of Chi. On this day, the hero's girlfriend swore to herself that she would always protect him, because together they can destroy all the monsters on their way. The city of Wuji was at peace, with the bright sun shining down on the tall skyscrapers, illuminating Kaiyuan High School as well. Lee Soo was in the restroom at number. It was not surprising, because he spent a lot of time there, and he trained hard, trying to improve his strength and abilities to a higher level. Soon enough, he decided to call it quits for the day. It was enough for now, and Soo wanted to rest for a while. But before that, he wanted to try to use magic again. He sincerely hoped that this time something would change and he would succeed. The system noticed a student, Lee Soo, who was improving his Chi, and at the moment, statistics were being kept on his achievements. All the time in his head was the fact that he could not achieve what he wanted, and accordingly, did not enter the university, even though he had passed so many levels of improvement. But despite all this, the system gave an error, and the guy was surprised by this result. He was sure that at least something had to change this time. But everything was repeated over and over again. He made no progress in developing his own abilities, and everything around him exploded once again, and the remains of his clothes and everything else that had fallen apart before his eyes began to fall on him. However, this time, something changed. His power measuring bracelet also broke. He didn't expect it. Soo didn't think that after the 10th level, it was possible to continue laying the foundation, and he was already at Iyo. After this breakdown, Soo wondered if it was a fake and if his item was defective. Someone's voice was heard from behind the door. Someone was shouting at Soo irritably because he had already started to bother everyone with his training because everything was exploding after his presence there. The head of his class ordered Soo to leave the room immediately. His time for privacy was over. He opened the door, behind which stood a beautiful girl in a short skirt holding a tablet with papers, and she scolded the boy because a bunch of students had already complained to the teacher about the noise Soo made so often. The girl entered the ruined room, looking around, recalling how many times this month she had defended the guy in front of others, and if it wasn't for her, all his training would have ended after the first explosion in the shelter. Lu Kang walked deeper into the room in amazement, looking at all the things the boy had done. She didn't know how to explain it. There were no words. The girl turned her gaze to the fire that had engulfed a certain area of the climate after the explosion. She waved her hand to clear the smoke in front of her face and asked what the young man was practicing here that had led to such a powerful explosion, and he only replied that it was the 5th time the level gauge had broken because of him. After that, she asked him what stage he had reached and picked up a pen to write something down on paper. Lu Kang was surprised that he was still at this stage, but the level had already reached 1,000. But she just smiled sweetly and said that he couldn't even lie, because everyone, including beginners, knows that there are only 10 levels in the purification state, and the laying stage is above that. She wrote down Sue's performance on a piece of paper with the achievements of the other students, all of whom had moved on to the foundation stage. The guy wanted to practice some more, but Lu Xing said that everyone here needs solitude to get into a good university, and his time was up for the day. An entrance exam to the martial arts university was scheduled for the following month, and only those students who had managed to pass the foundation stage could sign up for this exam. Lu looked down sadly as almost everyone in the other classes had already moved on to the next stage. And while they were under protection, the number of monsters outside the school increased every day, doubling since last year. According to expert research, they were returning to a period of famine, and this time it would have to last for years. And once this period comes, all the monsters outside will become even more fierce, and its power will only grow. There were many worries, because with the current group of warriors, it is not a fact that we will be able to cope with such an army of these creatures. This is why, starting from the entrance exams at their school, students will have more resources than before when they enter the university, and the time spent studying at the university will be reduced to 3 years, and applying to the university this time will be even more difficult. He thought about it, and then the guy said that if that was all, they could leave. The girl turned around, grumbling to herself, and was about to leave the privacy room. She was a little angry with Sue because she would have to justify him to the teachers and the principal again. But there was only 1 month left. The guy hit the wall with his fist, not knowing what to do. If he could not move to a new stage in this time, he would definitely not enter the martial arts university. But while he was angry, he received a notification on his phone, and his smartphone vibrated. Sue picked up the phone, and the message was from Lu Xing. She wrote to him about a martial arts forum. The teacher said that if Sue didn't understand something, he could contact them, and she also sent him a link to the site. Li Su very quickly started typing. He wrote that he was looking for at least some solution, because everyone had already moved to the stage of laying the foundation after the level, and he had already passed 1,000, and still could not move to a new stage of development. He asked why this happened, and asked for an explanation, and the teacher who was practicing the basics immediately read it and was ready to help. It seemed that Li's height was some kind of incredible sensation. There were several views, but no one liked him, and now he was convinced that he was the only one in the whole world. Until now, when disciples reach the level of purification, they automatically create a foundation. This has been the valid law of the cultivation world. It cannot be changed, so there is something wrong with it. The guy felt that the aura of his body was really getting stronger, but it was not concentrated in one point. The aura was scattered all over his body. But while he was thinking about his failures, all the students of the school were informed that in a few minutes, there would be a meeting at the martial arts stadium, so everyone should be there. Each of them immediately ran to the specified place. No one wasted any time, and a great deal of noise and commotion arose in the high school yard. But while everyone else was going down the stairs, and at least not pushing each other, the guy who was more criminal was ignoring everyone and waving his arms to make everyone move and give him room to pass. The students were shocked by his impudent behavior, but he just told them to let the older man pass. Uncle Ben was only at a percentage of his leg strength, and they couldn't keep up with him. He told them that they had to spend more time practicing if they wanted to be allowed to take the exam. When he came down to the yard, he saw Su Li, and he mockingly approached him, recalling his first place in school, and then called him a trash. But Su smilingly asked him his name. He didn't want to get nervous because of such a stupid and funny behavior of the guy, but only at the end, he specifically said his name as Zhou Sha. The boy started to get nervous. He was angry at the insult and told him to remember that his name was Zhou Tao, but Su continued to annoy him. Zhou was very angry with Su's behavior, but he could do nothing when Li attacked him and beat him up again, as had happened several times in the past. This week, Zhou Tao was constantly looking for Su Li to fight him, but each time he left with defeat and new wounds from the guy, someone even started to think that Tao was a masochist. But despite his good physical fitness, Su had not yet reached the level required to enter the university, and news continued to spread through the school that Li was still in the clearing state. When they heard this, they decided to deal with him and see how brazenly he would behave with them. Zhou and his company began to ridicule Li even more, pointing their fingers at him and accompanying him with insulting words. He couldn't even build a foundation for a foundation, so now Tao wanted to crush him, thinking he would be stronger. These words surprised Su Li. Zhou moved from the purification stage to the next in just a month, and everyone around him began to wonder where Li was now. Yahello came even closer, saying with an impudent, arrogant smile that the strong will always defeat a weakling like him. Constantly, while they were in high school, Sully was held up as an example to everyone. Joe was no exception, and he was always unhappy that Lee was considered better than him in everything. The girls who liked Joe rejected him because they liked Sully better. He was ignored by his teachers, rejected by the girl who liked Tao so much, and all because of this lowlife Lee. Tao suffered all this time because of him. But Lee threw his hand off and hinted that he hadn't tried hard enough, so Lee himself was not responsible for his failure. These words finally pissed Joe off. He was already boiling with anger at this guy, clenching his hands into a fist. Vic angrily attacked Su Lee and told him to pray that he would never see Uncle Ben in his life again. Su Lee realized that this was the stage of laying the foundations. It was powerful, and he prepared to defend himself. Zhou Tao hit Su hard, but he was not going to give in to him and continued to defend himself by covering his face with his hand. But despite all his confidence, anger, and rage at Lee, Joe was thrown right into the wall, which was now shattered by the powerful impact. A lot of people had already gathered there by then. His company started asking how Joe was doing, and if he was in much pain, while others just stood back in shock. Sully was pleased that he was able to put him in his place once again, because he was so confident, and now he was lying there, barely conscious, somewhere on the side. Many people were shocked by this. Su beat up a person who was an order of magnitude higher than himself. After that, Lee was calmly going to leave, but they shouted after him that he was just running away after beating up a person, and there are witnesses everywhere who will tell the teacher everything. But Su didn't care in the least. He didn't even listen to their chatter. And standing next to the guys who were watching the fight, he asked with a slight smile if they saw how Su dealt with the asshole. They knew everything perfectly well, but they tried to shield Joe, but they couldn't understand how the purification stage could be stronger than the foundation stage, while Lee calmly went on. While Zhou Tao was trying to at least get to his feet, Lee decided that he would go to the meeting and then think about what to do. Maybe the teacher could even answer his question. The inscription on top of the meeting place said that with each step their spiritual strength would grow, an instruction from the school itself. When he was about to enter the portal, a voice came over the loudspeakers wishing Lee good luck in the exams and urging him to keep trying. But he realized that if he had problems at this stage, it was almost impossible to go any further, let alone get into the university. The 100th induction ceremony of the Kaiyuan school was taking place in the sky above the training ground of the same school. The young man finally made it there. After walking a little further, he met many people, and soon the teacher himself, and the boy came closer to him and greeted the man. Sun Huide was the curator of the third-year group of the third year of the school. He asked Su how his month of solitude went when the guy was already standing next to him, and Lee laughed awkwardly and said that he had encountered a small problem on his way. Sun Huide adjusted his glasses and was about to take a look at Su's progress during this period of time. Almost immediately after these words, they were enveloped by a blue lightning bolt that shone very brightly, which is how the student's performance could be viewed. The breathing was very hard. Not that Sun, even the director himself, could not do such an elementary thing at this level. The teacher could not understand how with such skills, Lee was still at the stage of purification. And when it was over, Sully looked at the teacher and suggested that he do something with his hair because there was a breakthrough in technology and it could be saved. But Sun Huide took offense to this remark and hit him in the face with his folder of papers and added that he should take care of himself instead of looking after someone else. In a minute they were talking calmly. The martial arts university had already met them, but there was only a month left before the exam started, so Su had to hurry up and move on to the next stage. Otherwise, he would have to change his major. The teacher reassured Su Lee, saying that he shouldn't worry about it so much, that everything should work out by itself, and that life would not end here, after all. As soon as the meeting is over, the kingdom trial should begin. Su could leave by himself, giving any reason, because they don't know his cultivation base and he doesn't have to talk about it. But why did the boy hesitate about it and think about it? About to answer the teacher. But he replied that the teacher knew that the boy would not give up so easily, so Sun Huide asked him to tell him what level Lee was at now. Su calmly answered him about the 1000th level, and he almost fell over in shock, thinking at first that he had misheard something. However, before they could finish their sentence, Lee and Huida heard a loud explosion not far from where they were standing. Thick smoke rose. They both immediately ran there. People who were already standing nearby were screaming for help. There was a wounded person who needed to be rescued as soon as possible. The girl was lying among the people. She seemed to be barely breathing and unconscious, and the blow was delivered by a person who was at the peak of the laying of the foundation stage. While they were trying to help her, even more people gathered there and started shouting loudly when they saw the school principal. Meanwhile, while it was a sunny day and the sun was brightly illuminating the buildings around, The workers at the police station were very tired, even to the point of death. One of them even asked to oversee everything instead of him, because he hadn't slept the last night and was sitting comfortably in a chair, about to take a nap. But the employee wasn't so happy. Kaiyuan High School has gathered all the strongest, so it is unlikely that anything terrible will happen in the near future. But they noticed strange people outside their building who were suspicious and had never been seen before, so they asked to see their student cards. But their leader did not tolerate this attitude and broke the window, then sharply attacked the policeman and began to choke him. Force was a ticket to anywhere. The policeman was struggling to reach the radio. They needed to inform others as soon as possible, but he failed, and one of the gang members was holding a stone in his hand, which he was going to throw at his victim. When they heard his last breath, they broke into the room with the whole gang, leaving a trail of other people's blood behind them. Meanwhile, everyone at the meeting noticed the director approaching them, flying towards them on a golden sword, which could only be achieved at the level of a golden pill. Wu Daifao finally got down on the ground in front of his students, while they admired him and dreamed of reaching the same level as him. He walked closer to the crowd of people, among whom was a barely conscious woman whom Sun Huide had tried to save. Her clothes were torn, there were many scratches on her body, and she could barely breathe. Wu Def's director ordered him to help her first, and then he said that they were suspending the 100th Martial Arts University entrance test ceremony. All the students were very shocked, because something extremely serious must have happened if such an important ceremony was interrupted, and this was the first time such an order had been given since the founding of the Kaiyun School. Many people immediately began to worry about their entrance exams, and hoped that this decision would not affect their results. But looking at all this panic, the principal said that all students should behave more restrained. The school has just received word that the Jormungandr order, which reigns in the city, is involved in this situation. In order to ensure the safety of students, free entry and exit to the school was temporarily closed. He asked them not to act like heroes and think about the consequences. Each curator must monitor the safety of students and follow clear instruction. Chaos broke out among the students. They started running, tripping over each other. There was a complete panic. This order was ready to do anything to get their way. They even dealt with cultivators extremely easily. No one knew why they had come here, and everyone hoped that this horror would end soon. Suli was also standing in the crowd when someone grabbed his arm. The guy turned around to see who had done it. Behind him, he saw Lu Xing, who, unlike the others, was hardly panicking. She was quite calm. She didn't seem to pay attention to the whole situation and dragged Li along, saying beforehand that it was related to his entrance exam. When the two of them got a little further away from the crowd, Lu assured him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he wondered what kind of chance it was. A reward was announced for the mission in Wuji, but the fact is that Jormungandr plans to break into their school. Lu Xing unfolded a poster showing all the gang members, and if she was caught, the martial arts university would definitely see Li's strength and pay attention to him and accept him for training. The boy took the ad in his hands, and Lu added that her parents, who work in law enforcement, warned her to be very careful. But she also assured him that she would find allies for Li, who would be willing to help him in this difficult task. In her ear, she quietly said that they would split the reward equally, so each of them would be in the black, and Li would be able to fulfill his dream of entering his dream university. But Suli gave them this announcement and was already walking back to the dormitory. If he went to compete with such strong people at this level, he would definitely die and would definitely not enter anywhere. The girl was very angry. It was so merciful of her, and he did not appreciate her kindness at all. Meanwhile, panic and confusion were still raging in the courtyard. Someone was calling for Sun's teacher. Something had happened, and he immediately ran to help. The boy could barely catch his breath when he ran to the teacher. He told him about another fight between Su Li and Zhou Tao. Several ribs were broken. They were bleeding and were completely exhausted. Sun Huide anxiously asked if they had any help and, without waiting for an answer, ordered him to be taken to them. In his mind, he realized that something was wrong here. Suli was still far from Zhou Tao's level, because he was still at the level of purification. The teacher used his magic, after which he was enveloped in a green glow. He took the student who reported the trouble by the hand, and they went to the scene. It was a third-year dormitory at Kaiyuan High School, and it was daytime and the sun was shining. But this peace was interrupted by the Jormungandr gang, who were already close to their target. Huang Haopo, the supervisor of the Kaiyuan school entrance exams, had to be killed within hours. It was a good place to hide, and it's unlikely that teachers would think to look for them here. Even if they came across a few teachers, they would quickly deal with them, so they could handle a supervisor as well. If the team fails to do their job and lets someone slip through the cracks, the consequences will be severe. On the orders of their commander, They broke free, as if from chains, and ran to fulfill the mission. Su Li was sitting alone in his room, holding his phone, when he suddenly received a notification about a new comment on his post. He was happy about it. You could tell that his post was becoming popular because there were already comments. MANHUA was on the other end of the call. He was already at the martial arts university. He had a basic level of cultivation and did not understand how Li's level could be at the purifications. To begin with, I had to understand that when a person reaches a level, despite the strength of the training, the foundation will still be formed and the transition to a new stage will be made. And if it is true, about its 1000th level, then its energy is considered an inexhaustible source. Su suggested that in this case he might be invincible, but nevertheless, Manhwa proposed to verify the accuracy of this information with a device that measures energy. We didn't understand why he had to respond to such messages from applicants at all. He thought they were abnormal. And Su Li was completely disillusioned. No one believed him, and he was desperate. After sitting a little longer, the boy decided to leave his room and opened the door and looked around. Surprisingly, it was too quiet here. Rarely did you ever see such a thing. The guy walked through the empty corridors. He decided it was better to go to a safer place in case the Jormungand order showed up. While Su was still unsuspecting, one of the order was already standing in the hallway, listening when he heard someone's footsteps and stopped. He came here with a confidence that there would be no one else in the dormitory and he would be able to do his job in peace. And Su was looking at this guy in surprise, remembering where he had seen him before, because he was sure that they had definitely met somewhere before. He calmly exhaled that he was in uniform, because otherwise he would have been caught, and Li walked by thinking that such uniforms were deducted points. But when the guy was already far away, Wang He remembered that he forgot to cover the tattoo, so Su Li could guess who he was. He shouted something to Li as he entered the main corridor of the building. Su calmly turned around, thinking that he had decided to start a fight with him, but did not know why. Wang He only smiled wickedly. He summoned his magic. There was no other way out in this case. You have to kill the guy so that he doesn't turn him in. Wang He was approaching Su, and if he were to encounter him at his level of purification, he would definitely not be able to survive here. Li noticed that the mark on the stranger's neck was very familiar, and he recognized it. It was the badge of the Order of the Jormungand. Wang He was already very close, so close that Su Li's eyes were already panicked. Jormungandu member did not hit the guy. Su successfully dodged while he was trying so hard to kill him. They looked at each other and Van flew straight into the wall, punching a huge hole in it with his fist. Su looked over there. He was at the peak of laying the foundation. If he hit, Li was dead. Wang He quickly turned to his victim and was about to finish him off. Li would not even be able to defend himself normally against his power. It was over. But something strange started to happen, and the guy held his breath. There was a frantic surge of energy that had a blue tint. Wang He was about to kill the guy, being several dozen times stronger than. But Su Li managed to fight back very well. He didn't know how he did it, but the main thing is that he did. And he was no longer sure that his opponent was at the level of chi purification. Even among the representatives of the Golden Pill, he had not encountered such power. This angered Wang He, who became even more enraged and was now ready to kill his opponent. Jormungand member was going to use his most powerful magic, the Meteor Lion's Fist, to end this battle and emerge victorious. He was sure that this time he would definitely succeed in killing the guy. And Su Li had no choice but to hold the line to stay alive as long as possible. But Wang He was a little confused, as if his strength was being taken away from him, as if something was sucking his energy. Only now did he realize that the guy could have inexhaustible energy, with which he could resist his enemies for a long period of time. The two opponents fought hard, and despite Su Li's much lower level, he was very skillful in defending himself against the attacks, and then was able to strike a strong enemy. Van bled. But then the man flew high, which shocked Su Li. Wang He was unconscious, lying in a pile of stones that had fallen from the wall he had flown into. Su Li did not understand what was wrong with him and how he managed to defeat such a strong opponent. For a while, the boy stood steadfastly watching Wang He. The guy was walking in circles, thinking about what had just happened, and he couldn't figure out how he managed to defeat a strong enemy. But then, the young man got a message from a guy at the martial arts university saying that he had inexhaustible energy, and maybe that was really the point. To top it all off, Van's blood started boiling during the battle, and if he had taken some medicine, he could have had a heart attack. Su came to the conclusion that this was the case. He thought he was just lucky. But Li also decided that it was better not to leave him here, as the allies might find him. So he took him by the hair and dragged him along. First we should hide the body, and then Su was going to go to Sun's teacher to discuss everything. At this time, the teacher arrived at the school building with his friend Tao. Another friend stayed with Tao to see if he would get it worse. Sun Huide looked at Tao in shock, not knowing what could have caused such a destructive force. The boy could barely breathe, so the teacher gave him a special pill to help him feel better. He ate it, and Sun asked what had happened and put his hand on the student's shoulder. While the medication was taking effect and the wounds were gradually healing, Tao told him that he and Su Li had had a fight, but he didn't think Li would be so serious. And when Tao realized everything, he had already been pushed into the wall. Sun Huide could not imagine that the third stage of laying the foundation would come from a person at the stage of chi purification. It is simply impossible. His friends also knew about the level of both of them and didn't know how it could happen. They thought he had set it up to win and demanded punishment for Li, but the teacher had been teaching them for 3 years, so he knew they were capable of more. Huide told him to take Zhou to a safe place and he would take care of everything, so they said goodbye and left. The latter was catching up with his friends, and the teacher looked around, hearing footsteps behind him and questions about his person. The woman who had approached him stood next to him, waiting for an answer, and Sun began to reassure her, waving his hands nervously and telling her that everything was fine. She said that the director had upgraded the mission to rank A. The killers had reached the 3rd level of laying the foundation, and they were carrying lethal weapons. It was really something serious. An A-rank mission is no joke. There have been very few such missions in recent years, so Jormungand was well prepared. Well, the teacher went into the room and watched the CCTV cameras. Zhou Tao knew that Li was in trouble, but he rushed into the fight anyway. And what the teacher saw on the screen shocked him even more. Li's strength was super powerful and comparable to Zhou's. These were sudden blows that he delivered, and the energy was powerful. There was a sudden burst of energy that led to its critical value, and a random impulse that could defeat an enemy in one blow. Even if he had a much higher rank, such cases existed, but they are extremely rare in the world. The levels of cultivation began with chi purification, then moved on to laying the foundations, after which the strongest stages began. The golden pill, Yuanying, transformation, return, deliverance, Mahayana, and catastrophe. Su Li had very good abilities, and Sun wanted to help him get into university. And while he was thinking about it, Xinguan had already found him and was getting closer along the ceiling. He had a small knife in his teeth for defense, and a moment later he jumped straight to Sun Huide, intending to kill him. But the teacher was ready for such an unexpected attack and immediately summoned magic. He created a barrier to protect himself from the enemy's attack, and the shield was strong enough to withstand the attack. Xinguan jumped away from the teacher, dropping his knife on the way. In the beginning, he came here because he just wanted to find some information, and Shin didn't think he would meet anyone here. Now their plan has been exposed. It turned out that the Jormungandas were pretending to be students to get inside the school. Now the teacher could not be left alive, lest he report their appearance to others. But Sun Huide used powerful magic to defend himself against his opponent. He successfully deflected all his shots with barriers, and the guy could not get to. Jin was angry because he couldn't quickly put his newfound plan into action. He didn't think the old man would be so quick. But then Sun Huide took off his shield and grabbed Guan's arm, which he did not expect. The hands of the teacher himself were in the arms of powerful magic, so he quickly managed to throw the guy far away from him. Xinguan flew into the wall, breaking it down. The teacher was really very strong, and the boy no longer had the strength to struggle with him, sitting on the floor. Sun Huide looked at the boy for a while longer, but Shin didn't give up. He was going to deal with the teacher later, when he gained strength. The guy threw smoke bombs at him, after which heavy smoke rose, and Sun Huide covered himself with shield. He realized that at the beginning, he had to inform others that the Jormungand order had infiltrated the campus. The teacher immediately flew to his colleagues to report the situation, and the other members of the order, Jormungand, Ma Jixiang, and Liang Yangui, were waiting for their teammate in the hideout. He should have returned by now. Liang, who was quietly smoking, assumed that Wang Hai had already been caught and killed, but he was a 9th level cultivator, so it's not that easy to kill him. Ma Jixiang decided to follow him and see what was going on. He had just been given a golden pill and immediately became very brave, which annoyed him, but he was going to catch up. When Jixiang went out into the hallway, he saw something that shocked him. Wang He was being dragged along by some guy he didn't know, while the body left bloody traces. Ma realized that he was already dead. While remaining unnoticed, Ma thought that the guy really wanted to show off his power by showing the murdered Wang He as proof, so things were not as calm as the order might have expected. Jixiang was even afraid, because Su Li was definitely not a weakling. As he was able to cope with such a strong opponent alone, he did not dare to attack, because he did not want to repeat Wang He's fate. He stayed behind the wall, waiting for the guy with the dead Wang He to move far enough away. And there was only one way out. Jixiang took an interesting thing out of his secret pocket. It was a gun, and it was the gun the man wanted to use to show the end of Su Li, who was ruining their plans. It was the newest weapon developed by the Jormungand Order itself. It absorbed spiritual power and then abruptly threw it out, which increased the power of the blow several times compared to the usual power of a cultivator. The force of the shot will be stronger than the golden pill stage itself. Ma Jixiang could confidently say that he would finish with this guy and take revenge for everything. But this power was felt by everyone in the vicinity, by students, teachers, and the principal. Jixiang was about to shoot, but the bullet bounced off his hood and fell only under Su Li's feet, but did not wound him. His clothes were fine, except for a bullet hole, but nothing hit Li's head. The guy was very surprised when he took off his hood and looked at him. He left Wang He's body nearby and crouched down by the bullet that had broken the tiles in the hallway. Li picked it up to see what it was. But he didn't even understand where this iron thing came from. Meanwhile, in the dormitory, everyone who felt the powerful wave of energy talked about it among themselves, warning each other about meeting Jormungand. Sun said that he was attacked by one of them in the academic building, and that they were probably everywhere. The director listened intently to Sun Hyde, but noticed a strange silhouette behind the bushes. A yellow sphere appeared in his hands, which he wanted to point at the strange visitor, and Sun jumped out of the way in fright. But it was only the headman Lu Xing who came out of the bushes, not the enemy. She greeted them with a wave, but her appearance confused the director. The girl was asked how she got here, and she replied that she had been looking for Su Li everywhere, but had no luck, and she was worried that he would need help. Sun Huide nearly fainted when he heard that Li was still in the dormitory. Most likely, he had already run into someone from Jormungand. The teacher immediately went there, but he was asked not to act recklessly. A person with such energy was at a very high stage, so he should not go there alone. But he was serious. One of their students was still in the dormitory where he was in danger, so they needed to save him immediately. Sun was convinced that Li had extraordinary abilities, but even if he used the same technique as with Zhou, it would not help him against such a strong opponent. But the principal came a little closer and coughed to get the teacher's attention. The next moment, he stopped him, blocking the way with his hand. As a school principal, he could not let it go. In deaf, he created a sword using magic and said he would go first, and everyone else follows him. It's the right thing to do and the safest thing to do. With this composition, they went to rescue Su Li, and the guy who was standing there with the iron ball in his hands noticed the one who launched. Jixiang panicked. He didn't know where to go, and running away was not an option either, because it would be too suspicious. He failed, so he had to come up with something immediately, but nothing came to mind. Jixiang had already run through the scenario of his death in his head. He was sure that the guy would not let him die in peace, but would torture him for a long time. Su didn't understand what Ma was doing. First, he threw an iron at him, and then he started beating himself. Did he really think that Li would start running away from him? Su clutched the bullet in his hand, looking at the unknown person. Jixiang stood frightened in front of Su. He couldn't even hold the gun properly because his hands were shaking, and Li didn't know if he would win against this stranger. But he couldn't leave it at that either. He decided that this bullet would distract him, and then he would attack and strike. Li swung hard, throwing the iron toward Ma Jixiang. The bullet flew at him at breakneck speed, and he helplessly screamed for help, unable to move even a finger. He didn't know why he couldn't move and just stood there on his own 2 feet. The bullet hit him directly in the forehead, shattering Mei's glasses. Li watched in amazement and did not understand how he was doing it. Perhaps he had some talents that he had not noticed before. It was hard to drag one along, and then another one jumped out of nowhere. But before he left, Su noticed something that fell out of Ma's hands, a gun. He immediately ran up to it. The pistol looked unusual, and the guy carefully examined the weapon from all sides. It looked pretty good, so Su decided to keep the gun for himself, in case it came in handy. Liang Yangui was already there. He had no idea how this guy managed to deal with 2 members of the Jormungand Order so quickly. He realized that fighting one-on-one was very risky, and leaving was also not an option, because attacking from a hiding place would not lead to anything good. Suddenly, Liang Yangui heard someone's voice asking if anyone was upstairs in the dormitory, and he realized that he had to leave as soon as possible, because he would definitely be finished. Su didn't know what to do, even though he recognized his director Wu's voice, but he didn't want them to see it. The guy started thinking about what to do, and came to a conclusion in a few seconds. He decided to improvise. You need to make it look like these 2 attacked each other, so the boy put their bodies closer together. Soon, the picture of the murder was complete. But then director Wu Def appeared. Imagine his surprise when he saw Su Li, who asked him what he was doing here, and the guy felt uncomfortable and didn't know what to say to him. Meanwhile, a very powerful explosion occurred in the building, smashing a window. Liang Yangui jumped out of there, trying to escape, and he landed successfully, even though he jumped from a high floor. The guy looked around the dormitory, thinking of a plan, And a moment later, he walked into the room, put his hand on one of the walls, and summoned magic. He quickly realized what to do next and set to work. Something strange began to happen, but none of those present attached much importance to it. Liang realized that he needed to sort things out to put everything in its place. A giant dragon appeared from a strange portal. His eyes were filled with anger and madness. Su was surprised to see so many people come here. He thought it was the end for him. Now they would understand everything. The director asked Su, with a serious face, about everything that was happening here. He was holding a golden sword with magical properties. Su Li covered himself with his hands, claiming that it was all a mistake and he had nothing to do with it. The guy covered himself even more tightly with his arms. Su was very scared. He was afraid that the director might do something. Su was only at the stage of purification, so Yu Difa thought that someone else was involved in the deaths of these two people. The director paused, standing next to Su. The director told him to leave immediately because he could be in danger at any moment. In death, he worked his magic. With the help of it, he determined the level of the two dead people, but the fact that someone had killed them both at such a high level remained strange. He examined their bodies, which surprisingly had not been transformed, and many scars were visible, indicating frequent beatings. They took nerve-stimulating drugs all year round. The blow that Ma Jixiang received was fatal, and a person had to be at the level of a golden pill to be able to do that, so he concluded that Li had nothing to do with it. And when Wu Difa looked at his neck, he noticed the marks of members of the Jormungand Order. He was going to examine the bodies more thoroughly, because they couldn't have come here just like that, so the director wanted to find at least some more clues. He took out various pills, including Sisui, Dabu, and Tanglin, but it was all wrong. And Li said that he was very uncertain, and that if he didn't need it, he should give it to him. Maybe it would come in handy. But when Wu Defa reached into the pocket of Wang He's pants, he found a strange thing. It was a tetragonal seal, and no one else knows how to open it except specialists. The material was very dense, so it would be impossible to break it. He gave it to Huida's teacher, then the man had to send it to a laboratory where the seal could be broken. But due to carelessness and excitement, the seal fell off during the transfer. It hit the ground, making a loud sound. Su Li froze in place, looking at it all. After that, the seal hit his shoes. The director realized that the thing was most likely already broken. Everyone was looking at him in amazement. Sun Heed thought that it was Su Li's energy raging again. The guy didn't know how to explain it, so he made up any excuses. Wu Defa said it was very difficult to open, so Li did not know why it was so easy to open the seal, and inside it was a communicator. But before Li could finish, the director quickly took it away from him. The code was not supposed to be too complicated, so the director could easily figure it out. The indicator soon turned green and opened. After Juan Hobo, the supervisor of the entrance exams, came to the school, the order was to send 2 people to kill him, and the rest were to blow up the energy collection tower, as their original plan had called for. And they had no room for error. Looking at this short message stored in the communicator, the director realized that the target was not the supervisor. Their main target was the energy tower. These 2 gang members were just puppets. As soon as the tower collapses, percentage of the premises will be unusable because they will not receive energy, and the energy stored in the tower will spill out. Its force will be equivalent to an atomic bomb, and the explosion will take over the entire city. Now they knew the real purpose and plan of the Jormungand Order. They wanted to completely destroy the city of Wuji. They had to inform everyone about the danger, because it was already here. All people were under threat. And Li interrupted the director. He had one question for him. If all this was true, how could this crucial information be in the hands of the wrong people? Lu Jing added that the information might be fake to dispel panic, but that was secondary. They still had to strengthen the tower's security. The life of the entire city depended on it. If nothing was done, all cultivators would fail. Def hated with all his heart the Jormungand Order, which carried with it a trail of chaos and despair. Lu Xing and Li felt extraordinary power from the golden pill. The director exhaled heavily and took his phone out of his pocket. After that, he tried to send a message, but it failed. Li also had no signal. Lu Xing also looked to see if she could send something, but it was 0, no signal. But no one knew what the problem was. The director ordered everyone to split up, so he, the headman, and Li went in one direction, and the 2 guards and Sun Huid went in the other. In death, he saw a portal with the 2 of them, instead of the usual staircase in the dormitory. The stairs just disappeared from here. Ali was about to try to get in there, but Wu Defa stopped him. It could be a trap by the Jormungand. They could have done it to cut off their contact with the outside world. We had to find out whether they could get to other places, but while we were going about our business, something strange began to happen downstairs. The leaves began to stir, and a moment later, the monster's paws appeared over its huge eyes. In Lu Xing called Wu Def, she was very surprised. When they all came together to the place where they had initially met, they noticed that there were no bodies. Def sat down looking for some clues. The floor was covered with dust, there was no blood, so apparently the bodies just disappeared on their own. In addition, they were now on the wrong floor. Lukang panicked a bit. They were definitely coming back the same way, so she didn't know how it happened. They froze in place, there was a deathly silence, and when the two turned around, they noticed that neither the teacher nor Wu Def was there anymore. Li took Lu Hing's hand, causing her to blush, forgetting for a moment the panic that reigned in her soul. She couldn't even move for a while, but the principal and son's teacher were away, so they had to stick together. And her head was already full of different thoughts. The girl was still standing there red-faced. While they were holding hands, a monster climbing the ceiling approached them. The girl admired Li, and the monster in the form of a dragon was already right above her head. When Lu noticed the monster, she immediately dodged it. Li Su turned around, realizing that he had to get out of here. He squeezed her hand tighter, and they ran as fast as they could, just to get away from the dragon. The guy suggested running to the office to hide there. The two of them flew in very quickly, and Li closed the door, standing next to them to hold them. After that, the guy quickly looked around and found something heavy to close the door more securely. It was Zhou Tao's stuff, so there was no regret, and he pushed the nightstand towards the exit. He and Lu Xing closed themselves up as much as possible and hoped that this would be enough to survive the Manhwa attack. I heard a knock from behind the door. It was loud and strong. Li took Lu Xing's hand again when they sat down to rest. Now they were safe. Li asked if the girl was okay. She turned away from him, saying quietly that everything was fine. But something confused them while they were sitting in the room. They looked at the fan next to the ventilation system, and blue eyes appeared from it, looking directly at them. The dragon made its way there to find its victims and waited for the right moment to attack. And that moment came. They were quite exhausted. The dragon broke the grate, sticking its giant paw towards them, and then started screaming wildly. And soon the monster was in the room with Lu Xing and Li Su. She screamed and then hugged Li out of fear. But Li remembered that he had brought Ma Jixiang's gun with him, which was lying around, and Su didn't fully know how to use it, but there was no way out. He had to try. So Li pointed his gun at the dragon, preparing to shoot, and soon the boy imstered into its face. A giant sphere of energy flew out of the staff, which flew straight to the dragon. He hit it, the monster started screaming even louder. And Li Su was glad that he had managed to deal with the enemy again, even though he was frightened. Lu Xing asked him where he got the weapon, and he told her the truth. He had found it from the Yormagan people, but he was afraid to give it to the director, and that was the only thing that saved their lives. They were sitting with the walls and ceiling collapsed, along with the corpse of a huge dragon, but at least the threat to them was no longer lying lifeless. This picture really looked very creepy. These sharp corners looked like the blades of a pen, as Lu Xing noted. This dragon resembled the ancient horned dragon Astroceratops. It was agile, and its body was covered with thorns, and very sharp ones at that. Most often, they attacked and held on in groups. Li had no idea what that monster was doing here, but it was something of a social monster, if that's what you can call it. That is why there may be and possibly more. When he's the only one left, Lu Xing and Li will have a chance to get out of here and escape. Aang was very nervous, worried about the future, the unknown future that awaited her. But Li reassured her that everything would be fine one day. Once they found the source of the dragons, they would be able to return the dormitory to its former appearance and leave here with a victory. And they had just defeated one such dragon. Li was not going to let the plans of the Jormungandr Order come to fruition. Meanwhile, members of the Order were still roaming around the Kaiyuan school, and Xin Guan, who was lucky enough to get out alive, found Liang Yangyi, who was quietly smoking on the clock tower. He told me that Ma Tawan he was already dead. The kid was scared. He even stuttered a bit. He couldn't believe it, how she was killed so easily and quickly. Ma Jixiang and Wang He were too safe with the enemy and underestimated him. Liang Yanggui had never met such a strong person before and hoped that he would never meet him again in his life. Xinguan was frightened, and he was no longer sure of their plan, which had seemed perfect before. He was about to report everything, picking up the communicator, but Liang shouted that there was no need to do anything. If the commander found out that they couldn't even figure out the student, they would definitely get it from him. And it was right. The boss would definitely get angry at that. They didn't know what to do in that case. The fact is that he hadn't seen the commander in action, and if they didn't complete the task, they would be in trouble, and Xinguan was shaking with fear. But Liang Yanggui came up to him and calmed him down, saying that he had lured the school principal, Wu Def, and his student into a trap, so they would not be disturbed. If they complete the task, no one will even remember Wang He and Mei Jixiang, so we need to get to work. Time was running out. Liang showed a hologram of the school's premises, saying that now was the perfect time to attack and complete the mission. Meanwhile, The dragon had already come across traces of the people's presence, and each time it came closer to the place where they were hiding. Suli listened carefully to every sound, putting his ear to the door. It was at this point that they decided to start their escape, because Lee heard a strange sound that indicated the presence of the enemy, so he opened the door. Immediately after that, the guy shot him right in the face, and the two of them ran as fast as they could from the dragon, which was ready to attack. But when the ball of energy hit the opponent, his head flew immediately to the other side, and he screamed in pain. The scene in the dormitory was as follows. Wu Deifa and Sun Heed were on the 8th floor, Lu Xing and Su Li were on the 2nd floor, and the portal was at the very bottom. It was very strange. A lot of time had passed, and Sun Huaid and the director could not determine their whereabouts. And the director himself was most worried about his students. He put them first. He had to find them, because it was not known what danger awaited them in the corridors of the dormitory. The two of them were not yet in a position to fight a powerful enemy. But when the director opened the door slightly, he noticed two dragons behind it, looking directly at them with their eyes and waiting for them to come out to them. But Wu Deifa immediately used his own magic to repel the enemy. They agreed that the principal would deal with the dragons, and Sun Heed would go ahead and look for students. Def got a sword for defense. His opponents were strong, but he had powerful ability. He told him to go to hell, and then severely cut the dragon's head. Sun Huaid determined that they had to go down now, and both dragons were lying dead. They hadn't sweated like that in a long time, but they had enemies to deal with and students in danger to find, so they decided to reunite with the help of magic. A man sitting in the school corridors was very scared. He was waving a small lantern that he had with him, and his body was shaking with fear. He was very afraid of dragons, but since he didn't have any weapons, he couldn't really do anything, and he screamed even more when the monster came closer to his face. But while he was cowering somewhere in the corner, the dragon was already dealt with. The voice that made him open his eyes told him that he was safe and could get up and get out of this place. It was Lu Xing and Li Su. The girl held out her hand to the man, calming him down. The gun Li found was really very powerful. That guy burst into tears. He was so happy to be rescued, and that Li and Lu Xing were here. He recognized. He explained that he remembered Su Li delivering a speech at the last university graduation ceremony where he had always been an example for other students. They talked for a while the dragon was lying in the puddle of liquid, but they were still confused about why this guy was still in the dormitory since he had been warned, and repeatedly, to move to a safer place. He laughed awkwardly and said that he had overslept, and when he wanted to get out of here, he was suddenly met by a monster, so he could not leave. They stood up and smilingly told him to follow them and keep up, and together they would get out of here. The three of them went down the stairs, looking around cautiously. The company looked at the blue portal behind which the dormitory stairs were visible. They looked into it, but what was there frightened them, especially the new boy, whose hair stood on end. There were a bunch of dragons in the portal that they had just met. Li Su told the others that he would go first, but if he didn't return in a certain time, they should immediately get out of this place and go far away. Before stepping into the portal, Li gave Lu Xing a pistol of the Order of the Jormungand. If she was in danger, she could use it as a defense. She wished him luck, as she took the weapon in her hands and told him to be careful. The guy himself knew that he had to be very careful and act very careful. They had been sleeping for so long, and then they woke up so suddenly, the guy came even closer. It seemed that this portal was the main reason for the appearance of these creepy dragons in the dorm, so if it was destroyed, the problem would be eliminated and everything would go back to normal. But when Su Li went further in, he felt someone's eyes on him. He froze for a moment, and the red eyes of another enemy were looking down at him. He started waving his paws, trying to grab the boy and injure him so that he could finally finish him off. This monster was very big, and the guy was thrown back when it stepped on the ground and started to shoot at him. The dragon continued to fire, looking at his enemy, who could not yet stand up to defend himself. Lu Xing and the boy standing next to her were very frightened, though the latter almost fell over in fear, and Lu tightened her grip on the gun Li had given her before leaving. Although the guy flew away from the montage, he managed to land on the ground more or less successfully. It also turned out that the portal didn't actually transmit sound, so no one would have heard it even if Li Su had been shouting loudly. We had to make an immediate decision, or the monsters would wake up and Su Li's life would definitely end right there. The boy gathered his strength and wanted to hit the monster to at least shut it up so that it would stop screaming. A huge dragon was approaching Su Li and was about to kill him, and the boy's strength disappeared the moment he touched the dragon's body with his hand, and now he did not know what to do. The guy was desperately trying to think of something, but the dragon just pushed him into the wall, not allowing him to escape. Lu Xing already realized that Su Li could not compete with such a strong opponent, and the boy almost lost his soul as he watched them. She needed to calm down. Su Li was in danger, and she was the only person who could protect him, because she was the one with the gun. This red-haired monster is very different from the previous one. The outer shell cannot be broken through on its own, and a normal attack will not change anything at all. She decided to act immediately. She had to save Li Su, so she took the gun with both hands and was going to shoot. Lu Xing managed to hit the dragon that was attacking the boy several times. The dragon got angry and looked around to see who had hurt him, getting hit in the paw by bullet. But the girl couldn't even say a word. Nothing came out. He wasn't lying wounded, as she expected. He just got even angrier. The guy shouted at the top of his lungs to tell Lu Xing to run away, that if she stayed here, she would die. But the girl was confidently walking forward, not going to back down, Lu Xing confidently holding the gun, even though she was scared. The boy grabbed the dragon by its paw. It was very difficult to hold it, but he tried his best. The dragon was about to attack her, almost reaching out with its teeth to touch Lu Xing, but he closed his teeth and couldn't bite it, thanks to Su Li. The monster turned around unhappily, looking at his problem and the obstacle that prevented him from reaching the girl. He was his enemy and rival right now, so he can't be distracted. Su Li wanted to end this battle here and now, so as not to drag it out for too long. The dragon was very shocked when the boy began to pull him into the portal. As long as all the dragons were in his vicinity, Su Li made every effort to win. He gathered all the power in his hand and was going to throw this sphere right at the dragon. It was almost the only way to end it. There might not be another chance. Su Li tried to close the portal from which these monsters came to them, so he came even closer to it. He almost succeeded, and the portal gradually began to close. Every second it shrank in size, preventing the great dragon from penetrating Su Li. When the portal was already very tiny, and the dragon was still trying to somehow get to the boy, Li Su smiled, because the job was almost done. The monster realized that he could no longer reach his victim, and was going to retreat, because there was no point in staying here any longer. The monster was furious when Li Su managed to lock it behind the portal wall. The dragon roared loudly when he failed. He fought hard against the enemy, but then he was defeated. Liang Yanggui was walking near the Kaiyuan School Sports Stadium, contemplating his next step. Very soon they would be able to learn the true power. The Order of the Jormungand was already a step away from him. But he was stopped by a voice that asked from his class. Liang Yanggui was suspicious, so he was scared when he heard the question, because he hadn't seen anyone next to him before, and now he didn't know what to say. Two teachers named Chen Lu and Chen Feng spotted him. They said that all students should have evacuated to a safer place a long time ago, and not walked around the school when the Jormungand order was here. Liang Yanggui had no intention of staying here too long and straining himself, but in this case, he had to get rid of his enemies who were bothering him so much. Now he looked like a madman who had escaped from a mental institute. Only now did the two teachers realize that this guy was from the Jormungand order, and they had to immediately inform the others of the danger. But Liang Yanggui, without letting them do anything, used his own magic to destroy the enemy. He laughed like crazy, knowing that no one could help them, even though they hoped for it. But none of the teachers at Kaiyuan School were able to overcome him, who was at such a high stage. He had already buried them. These two were just unlucky to be here at the moment, facing such an opponent. But the two teacher brothers joined forces to defeat the enemy. They created a large sphere, with which they wanted to knock down a member of the Jormungand order, and then threw it directly at him. It was the right decision. Joint cultivation was a strong method to overcome the opponent. Joint cultivation was one of the strongest types of cultivation, which combines the strength of two or more people to launch a strong and powerful attack. The old technique required a great deal of effort and energy, and the dark flames also required a lot of strength, so there was too little energy left to fight two people. Behind the smokescreen, Liang Yanggui could only see two silhouettes about to attack him. When they both hit him with their energy, the boy moved away as quickly as possible to avoid being hit and managed to jump away and stay safe. The three of them continued to fight with each other. The brothers attacked, knowing that he was already at 0, so they had to destroy him immediately. But he still got hit by them, although not fatally, but it hurt a little. The teachers were proud of their work, but it was not over yet, because the enemy was still alive. Liang Yanggui was once again hit hard by both of them. They hit his shoulders, and he dodged the attacks as best he could. But he wouldn't have been able to hold out much longer, and he had to figure out what to do next to see the plan through and not fall into their trap. Liang Yanggui looked at them, thinking that this would be the last shot he would ever see in his life. But imagine everyone's surprise when the head of the order, Jormungand himself, appeared there, literally out of nowhere, thus protecting Liang Yanggui from death. The teachers were already afraid when they saw two opponents. One was quite strong, but somehow the two of them could still cope. But 2 was a problem. But there was nowhere to go. She just had to kill, and that was it. There was no time to stand still. But Aoma was too powerful, not so easy to defeat, so that stopped them a bit. Aoma simply have Chen-Lu in front of his brother, who didn't even have time to say anything. His lifeless body fell to the ground. My brother screamed. He was unable to fight the shock. He was a close person with whom he had walked side by side throughout his life, and then he was killed in front of him. Out of all the anger and rage that had gathered in the boy's heart, he gathered a magic sphere. Now he was competing with the head of Jormungand. It was to be revenge for the people who suffered and revenge for his brother who died in the battle with him. But he went to the other side to his brother. As soon as he got closer to Aoma, he hit him hard, and only pieces of his body remained, which fell to the ground next to Chen-Lu's body. Liang Yanguai stood quietly next to him, looking at the commander. He hadn't expected him to come, now that he did, so he didn't know what to expect for the unfulfilled mission. He was at the level of the Golden Pill, which was considered a strong stage. The commander was very angry and went straight to Liang Yanguai. And Li Su, along with the stranger and Lu Xing, sat and rested, because everything had fallen into place in the dormitory, and they were able to defeat the dragon and close it in the portal on the other side. The strange spiritual power disappeared, but now the connection is back, and the director received a notification on his phone about the payment arrears, so he was asked to replenish the account on time and not to be so late anymore. They had been closed here for too long. It was hard to imagine how far Jormungand had progressed in his plans, and he had to get all the teachers together as soon as possible. Director Wu Defa ordered Sun Huida to gather all the teachers to gather near the tower immediately. For the time being, the energy collection tower was still in perfect order, but it was threatened from all sides. All the teachers from the Kaiyuan school flocked to the tower, flying in on their swords, waiting for the meeting to begin. Specialized teacher Lu Chen spoke first, asking if everyone had already received the news from school principal Wu Defa about the tower's defense. Yuan Zhen replied that he understood, and that their main task was to protect the energy collection tower. Lu Chen asked if teacher Yuan Zhen was in touch with other teachers. Teacher Chen Ying said, holding the phone close to her, that Principal Wu Defa and teacher Sun Huid were currently patrolling the area, and that the other two had lost contact. Poma took Liang Yangai by the neck, squeezing him hard. The boy was almost overpowered by two people at the foundation laying. It was a real shame for the Jormungand order, but he was gulping for air with the last of his strength and wanted to explain everything to the commander. Liang Yanguai was already almost dead, unable to breathe because Aoma had tightened his throat. If it hadn't been for this terrible refinement level student killing Wang He and Ma Jixiang, he would have completed his mission and finished the job long ago. But the commander only squeezed his throat harder, thinking him a complete fool, because Aoma would definitely not have believed such nonsense as he said. The guy tried to take his hands off his neck because he was about to die at his hands, but the boss wouldn't let him go and wasn't going to do it. The commander lifted him into the air above him, squeezing his neck even harder. Liang Yanguai begged him to give him another chance to make things right, but he didn't think to listen to him. When everything was almost over, the guy picked up the communicator in his pocket with the last of his strength and said that there was very little work left to do. Just destroy the energy collection tower. Commander Aoma smiled. He was still at least capable of something. Perhaps he could be useful, so he decided to let him go and let him finish the plan. Aoma finally let his subordinate go to the ground. Liang Yanguai fell down, greedily grabbing for air. The commander decided to leave the entire tower on him, showing the hologram, so the guy could make amends. Liang Yanguai couldn't even answer him. It was too hard to speak, so he just tried to breathe somehow. When the commander approached him with a smile that seemed quite gentle, he was very surprised and did not know what he was going to do now. But then he smiled wildly, and it was even a little scary. The commander gave the order to plant the last bomb in the tower to destroy it anyway, even if he died, because only in this case the task of the Jormungand order would be finally fulfilled. Liang Yanguai stood next to him very frightened, quietly replying that he understood everything and would fulfill the mission. The next moment, the commander used magic while still holding Liang Yangui's shoulder. Meanwhile, in the dormitory of the Kaiyuan school, the principal met with the teacher Sun Huid and Su Li, but they were worried about Lu Xing, who was not with the boy. But he calmed them down right away, saying that they had run into another student in the dormitory. Lu Xing had walked him to safety, so she was fine, and Li Su was sent to report to the director. And then they asked if anyone was injured. Li Su replied that everything was just fine. A portal was found under the dormitory, and after it was destroyed, the entire building returned to normal, so there was nothing to worry about. The principal was surprised when it came to the portal. Most likely someone used a connection with space, so in that case it was not surprising that all these monsters appeared on the school ground. The principal praised the boy, saying that they had done a good job, but that he and his teacher Sun Huide had to go to a meeting of all the teachers at the tower. Wu Daifa told the student to go immediately and hide in a safe place, and they flew on their swords to the others. It was too dangerous to be outside, so they needed to get to a safe area as soon as possible. Li Su did not want to meet the members of the Jormungand group, so he ran to the shelter. And Xin Guan, who was watching from above, felt the Wang He energy from this student, who was still at the stage of chi purification. But the boy could not believe that this man had killed Ma Jixiang and Wang He. He was too weak for these two powerful cultivators, but he had to make sure anyway. So Xin Guan jumped down to Su Li. The boy noticed and heard someone's presence nearby, so he stopped for a moment but did not turn back. Xin Guan claimed that Su Li's body was actively emanating Wang He's aura. Su Li looked at him in surprise. This guy wasn't a dog, so how did he smell this aura? But he had to not pretend that he knew anything at all. Xin Guan folded his hands in front of him, looking at Su Li. He was angry. His teammates, Ma Jixiang and Wang He, were too careless with this guy, but Guan was not going to forgive him for killing them. Anyone who dares to disrupt their plan must die. And it was then that Su Li realized he was dealing with a member of the Jormungand group again. When Xin Guan was about to use his magical powers, Li realized that he could no longer see anything through them. Everything was covered in a veil of fire. The buoys were not solid fog, but small particles of spiritual power, and he felt as if he was enveloped by a barrier, so he could not move. Each person's spiritual strength is unique. It depends on their daily lifestyle, habits, and cultivation methods. Wang He was strong in physical cultivation, so his smell is mixed with sweat. Sin recalled how they had trained together and how often Wang He had teased. Right now, participant Jormungand managed to catch Li Su. He almost rammed his sword into Su Li's body from above when he was still unaware. But he managed to hit only his face, and the guy started bleeding heavily. Li Su did not understand how the boy could find him in the midst of such a thick fog. Su Li took hold of his face. His wound was painful, but he simply could not lose to his opponent. He had already killed 2 of their group, so he must not succumb to the third. If he remembers correctly, most of the trees planted near Kaiyuan are excellent guides. And now it was the flowering season. Su Li wiped the blood from his face. He turned to the trees for help. Xin Guan looked at him, not understanding what he was going to do. It all depended on how well he could smell the smell. And Cinia was not doing so well, because everyone was now mixed together, and it was impossible to make out anything. Now Su Li himself was wondering how the enemy would deal with such a problem. Li covered his hands. He now had a connection to the Dreves. He was going to find him among this barrier that Shin had created. But Sun could not believe that some student would be able to overcome him. But he didn't notice that something was flying right at his face, and Shin was very surprised. He was almost defeated, but he was not going to believe in this development until the very end. The next minute, he found himself under the rubble of flowers that densely covered him. Mu Li now knew that flowers could also be used as a weapon. When Shin was already dead, Li decided to look for something valuable from him. The director was not present, so Su would get everything. In his pocket, he found a similar item to the one he had, a kind of seal, but with a different symbol. Li twisted it a bit in his hands, about to open it, and then pressed the button. The seal opened, it moved, and super powerful energy began to emanate from there. This energy created a small model of the building. There was also a yellow dot that was constantly in motion, so it turns out that this is how the guy marked his target. So Jin Guan could easily observe where Li was at the moment. Liang Yanguai stood outside the school's stadium. He had a clear plan, no room for error. Everything had to be done right now, or he would end up dying at the hands of his commander. But something was wrong. Something confused him. And that something was the teachers who patrolled the school. But Liang Yangui did not expect that there were so many of them. Chen Ying was standing closest to him. She noticed the guy, thinking he was a student, and immediately ran over to him, thinking that the safe zone was under heavy attack, so he had to run away. The boy began to play the role. He took hold of his shoulder, saying that he was in great pain, and the teacher ran up to him, asking what happened. But while she was running toward him, Liang Yangyi pulled out a pistol of the Order of the Jormungand to shoot. He put a gun to her chest, and she looked at him in shock. Liang laughed, because now he could easily put an end to it. A moment later, the guy shot her, and Chen Ying fell to the ground. Now the body of the girl, another person who died from Jormungand, lay lifeless. Liang Yanggui laughed and sarcastically said that he was very uncomfortable and sorry. This was an example of how helpless and weak teachers are in the face of the most powerful order of the Jormungand. Liang Yanggui went on with his mission with inspiration. This murder lifted his spirits, and the headmaster of Kaiyuan School, Wu Defa, was looking for something on his phone, but something was wrong. 3 teachers did not respond to his message, and Liang Yanggui, whose hands had already been washed hundreds of times with other people's blood, stood happily in the high school yard. As he walked away from the scene of the girl's murder, Yangi shouted for help, only to mislead the school teachers again. The director of UDEF heard a scream, thinking it was a student, and now he had to check who was there, because all students were supposed to be in shelter. Def immediately went to see what was going on. He asked the boy what had happened and why he was still here, and Yangui was only happy that he had fallen into his trap. He reached out with his hand to the place where his Jormungand pistol was, and a moment later fired it directly at the director. Def did not lose his cool, and moved away in time to avoid being hit by a bullet, but now he knew he was close to the enemy. Of course, he didn't expect Yangui to start shooting again, but there was no way out but to win. The guy already thought he could hit his opponent, but Difa kept dodging. While he was firing and hoping to hit, the director moved and approached Yangui to strike, and he was shocked when he did not see his victim in front of him. Wu Defa used his super powerful magic to overcome the enemy, and after that, Liang Yangui fell to the ground. After the impact, a huge cloud of smoke rose. Almost nothing was visible. Only the coughing of Yangi, who was hit hard when he landed, could be heard. He was covered in blood. Wu Defa had hit him in the head, so his entire face was also covered in blood. But Yangui was not going to give up on this. Even though he did not expect to find strong people here, he knew that he had to bring victory to his order at any cost. So he said goodbye and was going to go to a hiding place to get away from them and figure out how to proceed. But he didn't have time to do it. Yuan Zhen, who was a teacher in this school, came to the aid of the principal. She used her magic chains to catch the Jormungand member. By releasing them directly in his direction, she managed to detain Liang Yangui. Due to fatigue and carelessness, the guy did not have time to avoid her trap. Soon he found himself in strong chains and had no way to get out. It's good that the girl came on time and was determined to fight the enemy. Yuan Zhen pulled him closer to her, and Liang Yangui realized now that everything was not as sweet and easy as he had thought at first. Finally, she managed to catch him, the last remaining member of the Jormungand gang, except for their boss. The teacher kicked him in the face with all her might, so that he bled even more. She wasn't going to stop there, so when he flew down, the girl followed him. Holding the chains at her hand, she looked at her opponent with anger in her eyes, and a moment later, she hit him sharply in the face a second time. Now that they were on the ground, despite his severe injuries and wounded face, Liang Yangui put his gun forward and wanted to shoot. But before he could do so, Yuan Zhen threw his gun away from the guy's hands. Another second, and she would have killed him for sure. She wanted to take revenge for everything he had done, and especially for teacher Chen Ying. However, the directors came over and stopped her, telling her to calm down a bit, that Liang Yangui was the only living member of the order and the only one they had caught. So they had to take into account the situation they were in and not let their emotions get the better of them. Yangui already had one foot in the grave. He had been through a lot today, so he could not perceive anything normally, and the girl angrily took him by the shirt collar, saying something through her teeth. Def was holding a weapon that belonged to Liang, but even the director's energy could not affect this gun, no matter how hard he tried. It was hard to imagine how many more weapons the Jormungand members might have, and the consequences could be catastrophic for the entire town and the school, so Udefa immediately called the teacher's hotline. He announced an even greater danger and said that Jormungand members were pretending to be students, so now it was necessary to check everyone who would approach the energy collection tower. Liang Yangui, already completely exhausted, sitting chained up and barely breathing, Wu Defa ordered him to be taken to the school's training ground to be interrogated. And Suli was walking around the stadium, holding the thing he had found at Shin Guan's, trying to figure out how it worked, and now it started to flicker even brighter. Nothing better came to the boy's mind than the idea that the Jormungandas might have hidden some treasure here, a very tempting thought, so he wanted to check it out. He began to look around for any clues, and wanted to find a trail that would lead to these treasures that were not yet known to exist. But suddenly he heard a squeak. He turned his head and noticed something that looked like an explosive, and it wasn't quite so funny anymore. Lai recalled Sun Huaide's lesson, when the school was still safe and they went to class in peace, and on that day they had to disassemble the structure of an explosive invention, and Suli was to give a demonstration. Sun Huaide warned that the red wire should always be removed first, and only then the green wire, and the main thing is not to mix them up. And when the teacher was telling him what could happen if he did the opposite, the boy cut the green wire, looking at Sun Huaide. At that moment, he realized he had made a mistake and smiled while holding the bomb in his hands, but because of the shock, he could do nothing. The green wire activates the bomb, so it immediately exploded, and everyone ran out of the classroom. But the student sitting at the first desk remained asleep. Sun Huide was incredibly angry with Su Li, and he had just warned him how to do it, so Li started running as fast as he could to avoid getting hit by the teacher. He had to destroy the red wire before the Uomba would break and blow everything up, but he didn't know if he remembered everything correctly. However, there was only one attempt. As if he would do nothing now, everything would go according to the order's plan, and there would be no one left alive. Aelma, who was watching him, saw what the guy was doing, but the commander did not know about the death of his ward, so he thought he was watching Shin Guan, and he was very surprised when he simply disposed of the bomb instead of acting according to their plan. Later on, Su Li completed the work completely and managed to defuse the explosive. Now the guy wanted to check what the hologram on the seal would show. He was shocked when it warned him of an object approaching him, only meters away. Su Li left everything as it was and immediately ran to the bushes to hide there, hoping very much that he was not seen there and that no one else noticed anything. The boy lay down on the ground to hide behind the green dense bushes, and while he was lying there quietly, Commander Aoma approached the place, and he was very angry because he did not understand why Shin Guan did not fulfill the plan. But the leader of the order saw no one nearby, only the disposed of explosives lying under his feet. He noticed these bomb remnants only now. They also led the way to the bushes where the boy was hiding, and then Aoma noticed the boy's feet, but he still thought it was his ward and ordered him to come out immediately. The fact that he was silent pissed off the commander, so if he gets too angry, he won't be to blame because the guy didn't want to come out. Aoma's hands held a giant sphere of magic, which he threw in anger right into the bushes. But the guy was lying there, calmly repeating to himself that no one could see him here and everything was fine. Meanwhile, a powerful sphere of energy was already on its way to Su Li. Only now did he feel the extremely powerful energy nearby and opened his eyes. A massive explosion occurred on the territory of the Kaiyuan school. If the guy had stayed in the bushes a little longer, he would hardly have stayed in this world. Aoma spotted a stranger behind the mountains of smoke, and the leader immediately asked him who he was and where he got the badge. Su Li looked at the thing in his hands and then replied that it was nothing special, he had received it from someone. So if he found the owner, he could try to inform Su Li. But the commander did not like this answer. The Yormagan gang tokens were unique, and someone else could get them only if one of the members died. The guy was not expecting the attack so immediately, so at some point he got very agitated and stood unwaveringly in one place. Aoma wanted to hit him, but missed, even though he was close to knocking him down. His speed and strength were not the same as before, when he fought other members of the Jormagan, so he realized that he had a more serious enemy. Aoma, in turn, felt that this young man was only at the stage of chi purification, so Shin Guang's loss surprised him even more. But that was just a show, and the real fun is about to begin. Aoma accelerated and hit the guy hard. He was hit hard by the enemy, but managed to cover his face with both hands. However, Su Li still flew straight into a tree and hit it. It was painful. It felt like he had broken every bone in his body, and his nose was bleeding profusely. The commander stood in front of the boy with satisfaction, looking him straight in the eye. After that, Aoma punched him in the ribs, considering him a weakling at the level of purification. The fire had not yet gone out, smoke filled the space, but no one came to help, and Aoma himself continued to abuse the boy. In general, it was surprising that Li Su was still alive after such a beating, but his bones were fortunately hard, and he was now covered in blood, but he continued to breathe, although he was almost unconscious. The commander took the badge from the boy's hand, which had previously belonged to Shin Guang. He had made a mistake and didn't know how to contact Liang Yanggu, but he tried to think of something. While Aoma moved a little further away, Li grabbed the stone in his hand and squeezed it as hard as he could. The man turned around when he heard the sound, and was surprised that the boy was still alive. Li held on. He wasn't going to let the enemy go when he had played with him. He wanted to get even. The students of the Kaiyuan school are not easy to confuse. They were taught by some of the best professionals. So Li swung a stone at Aoma. But the commander was not at all afraid of this. He just laughed at such a wonderful idea to overcome it with an ordinary stone. Li did not listen to him and took off running, after which he threw a stone at his opponent. This time the guy didn't succeed. Ma easily caught the stone right in front of his face. However, Li ran closer to him to strike. While the enemy was not expecting it at all, Li was getting closer and closer, and the man was standing still and could not move. Li deliberately ran in a zigzag to confuse his opponent so that he wouldn't catch him, and after he successfully reached him, he ran behind him. In the end, Li grabbed him from behind with all his might so that he could not escape his grasp, and then it fell to the ground with a loud crash. The ground split and cracked in several places as they fought each other. But Ma was soon able to move away from Lee and hide in the smoke for a while. Completely covered in blood, Su Li continued to fight, even though he hadn't met such powerful enemies for a long time. But he had already fought strong cultivators, so he didn't even think about retreating. Aoma was very angry with him and still did not consider the young man a worthy competitor. His eyes grew red, and it seemed as if he could kill Lee with his punch in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the director, Yuan Zhen, and Liang Yangyi, whom they were going to interrogate, had already gathered at the training ground. But the detainee didn't care anymore. The explosions were to take place on the school grounds in a few minutes anyway. They had almost fulfilled their plan. While they were fiddling with it, all the actions were going into activation mode, and soon their peaceful and tranquil life would come to an end. Liang only wanted them all to feel the true power of Jormungand. Everyone who was standing next to him began to beat the guy harder, ordering him to deal with all this, because he was their prisoner. And while Yuan Zhen was watching him, the principal asked another teacher what the situation was at the energy collection tower, and he just asked the teachers to inspect it again to understand everything. Difa wiped his glasses, now knowing that the only way to make the school blow to pieces was to put explosives inside it. The next second, he abruptly grabbed Liang Yangui by the collar, demanding that the boy tell him where the device was. But he had nothing to lose, and Liang would not provide them with such information under any circumstances, especially when he was sure that Jormungand's rule would soon be confirmed by the destruction of the school. And while they were arguing and trying to figure something out, they heard a loud explosion, a bright light flashed, and then both became quiet. The students of this institution were in a safe zone, and their mentors gathered them all there. Everyone was there. Teachers and doctors were sitting with the students. Some students were not feeling well, so they needed to be monitored, and everyone was whispering to each other about the latest news and waiting for permission from the principal to come out of the shelter. 3 girls were sitting in a tent, including Lu Xing. One of her friends was very afraid, so the other 2 tried to calm her down. Lu King was only worried about Su Li. He said that as soon as he talked to the director, he would come to their safe zone. The girl was confused by his absence. She was thinking of calling him to make sure he was okay. So, after moving away from the girls a bit, she dialed his number, waiting for an answer. When the beeps were not interrupted by his voice, Lu Xing was already beginning to panic, and when the call ended, she started to worry even more. Tears had already begun to form in her eyes, and thoughts of the worst were running through her mind. She was afraid that Lee might have met a strong enemy and lost the battle with him. After that, she definitely could not sit still, so she ran towards the exit. She couldn't let anything bad happen to her. Meanwhile, Commander Jormungand continued to play with Lee, who miraculously survived all the abuse. Lai couldn't compete with Aoma at all. His opponent was too strong. But for some reason, he felt a constant rush of blood in his body. It was strange, but maybe it was because he hadn't fought so hard in a long time. After a moment, Aoma shouted at the guy to give up immediately because he was not his rival, so there was no point in wasting energy. But Lee did not react to this and pointed somewhere in the distance, saying that someone was coming towards them. But he's not that easy to fool, so Aoma didn't even turn around. Lee hoped that the explosion had attracted the attention of the principal or teachers, but it seemed that no one had noticed because so far, not a soul had been heard from the 2 of them. Despite this, Lee did not stop believing that someone would help him because he could not stand any more abuse. And then a miracle happened. Something really interested Aoma, and for a while the man stopped. Now things were not so good. He felt energy and quite powerful. And it wasn't just one person. Several teachers, led by the principal, came to help, and Lu Chen was still holding Liang Yanggui hostage. Wu Difa ordered the commander of the order to surrender immediately, and all members of the Jormungand, except him, were killed. The director also added that his associate had betrayed him, so there was no point in continuing this scene. Yangyi himself could not say anything. He was tied up as tightly as possible, and he was powerless. But none of the director's words affected Aoma. He only got angrier and wanted to sweep everyone out of his way. Since they were all here, he wanted to deal with them all at once. But despite his strong desire to destroy these people, Aoma could do nothing. His body was pierced by fierce pain. He fell to one knee, clutching his heart, and began coughing up blood. This was the final energy of Lee's punch that he had dealt him a few minutes ago. And while the commander was distracted, the others took advantage of this moment and attacked him. But he moved away in time, so Sun Hyde was unable to hit him this time, but the next shot was better. He hit the target and then relied on Teacher Lu. She was already in front of Aoma, who was very unlucky to receive a strong blow right in the teeth. After that, the man flew into the wall, and thick smoke rose again around them all. The girl could not even think that it was so cool. She had already forgotten how cool it was to fight with her opponent. But the leader of the order would not allow him to look down on Jormungand. He took a thing in his hand and then pressed a button. Aoyama went crazy, realizing that his entire group was dead and the plan was falling apart. While he was shouting loudly, everyone was looking at him in silence and shock. When he finally stopped talking and opened his eyes, he saw her surprised and angry expression. After that, Aoyama looked at the button, surprised that nothing worked. Lee came to the front and said, laughing a little, that he had recycled all the bombs, so nothing was happening. They had no more trump cards, and Udefa offered him one last chance to surrender, so that Aoyama would be handed over to law enforcement and he could stay alive. But everyone was already on the alert in case he started to rage and try to escape. But this deathly silence was interrupted by Lu Xing, who was overjoyed to see Lee in front of her, hugging him with all her might and telling him how worried she was about him, but there was no point. The principal and other teachers were already here. A guy asked her next, and he was a little angry that she came here because it was too dangerous, but Lu Xing was worried and wasn't going to just sit in the shelter. Aoyama laughed out loud. One of the most powerful bombs was now among them, and they didn't even know it. Such words confused them a little, but in general they shouldn't take it seriously, because he could just be causing panic. The man raised his hand up, ordered to remove the seal, and his hand was enveloped in a red light. Liang Yanggui, who had been forgotten by everyone, sat in shock, looking at his commander. Everything that was happening could have ended very badly. The energy in Liang Yanggui's body was super powerful, and there was a risk that someone could die if they were not careful. He was about to break down. His body would not have withstood such force. Liang Yanggui ran to Lu Xing and Li, who were standing nearby, because Aoyama had removed the seal. He was completely mad and could no longer control himself. Li quickly rushed forward, telling Lu Xing to go to the director and the others as soon as possible, and he would handle everything himself. The guy grabbed Liang Yanggui so that he could not move and injure others. Aoyama stood there with his mouth open, not hiding his surprise, but he did not expect the last link to go awry. Li jumped up to the commander, not letting go of Yanggui. The monster that Aoyama had turned into Liang Yanggui was screaming frantically. Li threw him straight to the commander, freeing his hands. The principal warned that it was all too dangerous and covered Lu Xing with his hands, ordering the other teachers to prepare for increased defense to prevent the scale-up. They quickly organized everything and were ready to defend themselves and fight back. Aoyama had already realized that he was a loser, that he couldn't change anything now, so this only made him more angry. The principal also joined the teachers to finally put an end to their existence. The heavens were ready to help. Each of the cultivators used their most powerful energy for this purpose. Lu Xing had already begun to cry. She realized that this could be the end for Li. The girl wanted to escape from the teachers, but they held her tightly. And now it's come to law enforcement agencies. They were based in a skyscraper that was enveloped in magical energy. In the hall of the law enforcement agencies, the employees were watching everything that was happening. According to the latest data, the system has just tracked an explosion with a coefficient of EAL at the Kaiyuan school, and the range of the explosion was meters. It was very strange, because the coefficient is very large, unlike the blast radius. The head of law enforcement was convinced that it was the work of an outsider. The coefficient of the explosion itself varied from 0 to 9. If it was equal to or greater than that, it was considered a super powerful energy release. We decided to visit Kaiyuan school right away, and there was a horror there now. The training ground was completely destroyed. Nothing was visible because of the terrible explosion. Liang Yanggui and the commander of the Jormungand Order, Aoyama, were in the center. Even a person in the Yuaning period would not be able to survive the explosion of such powerful energy. Sun Huid shed tears as he remembered Su Li. Lu Kang fell to the ground in tears. She did not want to believe that it was true, and that she would never see him again. But to my great surprise, I heard a voice right from the site of the explosion. Su Li got to his feet. He was fine now. The guy was smiling, although he was covered in scratches and blood, but he was standing up and survived all this horror. But a moment later, the smile disappeared from his face, and he began to fall down. When the guy fell to the ground, everyone ran to him, hoping to save him. The girl put his head on her lap, and Wu Defa was going to use his energy to heal his injuries, and there was no need to worry. Su Li had managed to protect his internal organs, so there was no big problem. Sun Huide and Lu Chen watched the director's actions in silence. They had nothing to say now. While the principal was treating a boy who had been injured in the fight, law enforcement officials arrived at Kaiyuan school. Defa reported this immediately. He and 2 teachers approached them, but the school had long faced such serious problems. There were powerful enemies here, and they should have visited them long ago. but the leader of the lawmakers only gave them an apology. But their leader assured us that we shouldn't have worried anyway, because they had always been following the plans of the Jormungand Order very closely, and his personal visit here was the best proof of that. So the school sorted out the people and decided to rely on law enforcement for everything else. The man said that he had not thought of such a course of action. It was strange that Jormungand had sent here a man who possessed the golden pill. He asked who was fighting him, and received a shocking answer. Only a student from the school was fighting the enemy. The guests were very surprised to hear these words, because the students are not yet strong enough to fight such rivals. The leader looked at Su Li, who was still lying unconscious. He could sense his level of chi refinement, which was even more surprising in this whole story. The man touched him, using magic to help him come to. After a while, the boy opened his eyes and saw several strangers in front of him. The old man started asking the boy something. He had to see something. Su Li replied without understanding that he could see everything. Sees that he has a lot of wrinkles. He was a little offended by this answer, but at least Su Li was alive and recovered from a difficult battle. The law enforcement leader began to talk about the vine, which has 7 leaves that can bear fruit, the lowest stage being yuaning, and the words early and middle referring to the period of cultivation. The first fruit of the vine is the top, the peak of the yuaning stage. He confirmed what Lu Xing had said, and it was true. And then he told me to answer his questions very seriously and not to try to hide the truth. He sat down next to Li Su and asked him if what had just happened was really his doing, and the young man calmly told him the truth. There was no point in lying about it. But the man did not believe him and asked to bring special devices for testing. This guy still needed to be tested. His wards understood the request and brought him the device. In a moment, the man was checking Alma, and Li wondered what kind of device it was. He was told that it was an exclusive law enforcement device that could show the past by using the energy of a deceased person, but that most of them were just fragments of memories. The man began to look through Alma's past, and there were indeed only fragments of memories, but it was possible to recognize at least something. The old man was watching what was happening on the screen very seriously and with interest. He watched for a while longer, and then everything became clear to him. But they still had to take the body. They had created magic balls in which to transport the bodies, and they still had to talk to the director about everything else. So Wu Difa turned to Lu Xing and told her to go rest with. She helped Li up and held him all the way to the dormitory so he wouldn't fall, and she also told him not to do that again and to think before he went into battle, because he wouldn't be so lucky again. Lu Xing was worried and kept telling him to stop acting like that and causing trouble, but Li just exhaled heavily. It was too much control for him. They started to quarrel as they walked away from the others, but Li decided to keep quiet so as not to irritate her even more. However, the leader of the law enforcement agencies listened attentively to their every sentence. Meanwhile, the loudspeakers inform all students that the alarm has been lifted. Now everything was fine, and the martial arts university entrance ceremony would be held again. But all the talk was not about exams anymore, but about Jormungand. Even though the threat had passed, it was still scary to realize what had just happened. Many people talked about Su Li, who managed to overcome the participants of Jormungand. But their conversations were interrupted by the director of UDEF, who came to the students personally. First of all, he wanted to remind them that their students are their future, so let them study properly. Soon they will take on all the current affairs on their shoulders, so they need to prepare diligently for exams and set a goal to enter the most prestigious university, a speech he gave every year. And the next topic of conversation was to be the situation with Suki. He had made a huge contribution to the destruction of Jormungand, so he deserved a letter of recommendation from law enforcement, and this news shocked both the guy and all the other students. Given all of Su Li's successes and achievements, the school decided to allocate a place for him at the martial arts university. Some of the students started laughing very loudly at this news, while others were just jealous. One of them exclaimed that he was also hoping for such luck. It would be so cool to get into the university of his dreams without passing exam. And since he had a letter of recommendation, he would be able to get a job in the authorities without any obstacles after graduation. Lu Xing was sincerely happy for him. She congratulated him on the news, but the guy was even a little uncomfortable listening to all this in front of other students. He did not like so much attention to his person. He had a great and interesting future, many prospects, and a good life. Sun Huide was also happy with this result. He had been worried about Li when he could not get to the level of laying the foundation. He hugged him. Everything worked out as it should have. He did really well in school, so who else but him would go there? And Li thanked him for so many years of teaching with him. Li was always worried that he wouldn't be able to lay the groundwork, but he helped him find another way to achieve the goal. But then the man became serious. It was his duty to help them with admission, and as long as they continue their studies at the university. Sun Huide's efforts will not be in vain. but he reminded them that they should not look down on others because of their success. After all the compliments and guidance, they let him rest, and Lee promised that he would study hard and not let his mentors down. Soon, Lee returned to his home. It was night, and only here and there was the sound of cars. The guy put all his things on the couch. Finally, he will be able to have a good rest. He ran a hot bath to completely relax, but still, the main problem was haunting him. He didn't need to worry about entering the university anymore, but Lee still didn't know how to lay the groundwork. He was brought out of these thoughts by a phone call. Someone came to his house so late. Lee was a little surprised that someone came to see him at such a time and had no idea who it could be. He had to put aside his work and thoughts and go to open the door. While the guy was getting dressed, the person on the other side of the door kept calling. He opened the door and saw Lu Chen standing behind it, wearing long stockings and a suit with an open neckline that looked very seductive. Lee looked out of the house and looked at her, wondering why she had come here so late. And the girl stood in front of him with a serious expression, and then said that she was here at the request of the director. Here Lee was scared, because if the director sent her to him so late, then nothing good was to be expected. Apparently, he wanted to give Lee an additional task. So the guy decided to come up with something immediately and said that his body hadn't fully recovered yet, so it would be better to wait until classes started. But when Lee tried to close the door, he failed. Lu Chen literally kicked it in. It was about his university and employment, so he laughed awkwardly and let her in, but she still walked forward with a serious face. When the two of them entered the room, Lu Chen handed Lee a letter of recommendation from the Law Enforcement Bureau, and after he completed his studies at the university, he could easily go to work there. Lee gently took the letter and looked at it fascinated, but they had a small request. They needed to go to the underground guild during the summer vacation to gain some experience. The young man was not happy about this. He almost dropped the paper from his hand. The trip to the underground guild shocked him. The underground guild was located in an underground city that was on the border of fierce monsters. The guild was considered a very creepy and terrifying organization. There were a lot of criminals and illegal immigrants gathering in the underground city, and it was really scary. Murders, robberies, life and death challenges, these were absolutely routine here, and no one would be surprised by them. And the Underground Guild is the same camp of this group of criminals. The guild regularly gave out various missions with good rewards, but they are even more limited. You don't get anything until you reach the goal. Very often, members of the guild betrayed and killed each other. And if he goes to the underground city, the question arises whether he will be able to return from there alive. And there was no question of entering a martial arts university at all. Now Lee had a different opinion about this letter of recommendation. He put it back on the table and asked teacher Lu Chen to give it back. He didn't need the letter or the qualifications to pass. He would find a new way to get into the university. But Lu Chen assured us that we should not reject the offer so abruptly just because we were worried that the underground city was too dangerous. So before he went there, Lu wanted to give something to Su Lee. She put the soul pill on the table. Even if his meridians were severed, and Lee was already on the verge of death, he would only have to eat the pill and save his life. And she gave Lee a special chainmail. He had to wear it under his clothes, and ordinary swords, pistols, bows, and other weapons would not be able to harm him. As long as Lee was not an incarnation period cultivator, he could block any strike. But then Lee began to be pulled in different directions. He did not know what to choose. These were rare treasures. But in this case, he would have to constantly worry about his safety. And yet, Lee wanted to refuse, explaining that such precious things should remain with her. But the girl didn't show all her cards yet. She pulled out a black card from her bra. This card was produced in a limited number in the underground city. It could be possessed by literally a few people in the world of cultivators. With its help, Lee could walk around the underground city without any difficulty. Lee's breath hitched when he saw the black card. But the guy felt that he could be deceived, that if this card was really so powerful, how could it be so easily put into his hands? The girl didn't like that he was wasting her precious time, so she asked him for his final decision. It was a great opportunity to prove himself, and he was not ready to give it up so easily. Perhaps this underworld guild could help him move from the chi refining stage to the next. Now Lee could feel the very pure energy around him. If he makes the right choice, he will be able to control his energy as easily as Lu Chen. His body was full of energy, but it could not come out in full. Later on, Lee would be able to figure out his abilities, and it wouldn't be hard for him to create something like what the girl showed him. But now it's just a bunch of energy inside him. If pressure is applied, the energy can take any form, and if it gives up some of its attributes, it can change its state. Before she came here, Lu Chen talked to Lisu's class teacher. He never cared about the cultivation world, but he was always first in every test. This has led to his environment becoming extremely comfortable without any external pressure, which may be the reason why he is unable to move from the period of chi purification to laying the foundation. Only when faced with trouble will people actually change, and you just need to push harder. The Underground Guild is a dangerous area, but the items and the black card the girl gave him can protect him as much as possible. The girl used magic and said that it all guaranteed his safety. Lee stood silently watching her, afraid to breathe, let alone move or say anything. But Teacher Lu Chen's words sounded really quite reasonable and confident. Perhaps the reason that prevents them from moving to the next level is that they are too comfortable. And if the guy still had doubts about the two options, Lu Chen was ready to give in to him and not insist on it, but she would take back all the treasures and the black card. Lu was about to pick up the letter of recommendation, but Li Su grabbed it and firmly stated that he would go to the Underground Guild. This is a large and complex matter that requires extreme caution. He decided that he would not touch strange things, would not take on dangerous tasks, and would ignore seemingly dangerous people. While he was going to stay in the Underground Guild for a month, he was guaranteed conditions for admission to law enforcement agencies and no worries about entering a university. He had nothing to lose, so he took the things Lu Chen had given him and held them tightly to his side, and the girl headed for the exit, having done the job with flying colors. Everything was settled. Lu Chen smiled, proud of herself for being able to convince him. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, someone was to escort him to the underground city, and with that, the girl left his house. The next day, as they had agreed, a girl came in the morning to escort Li Su to the city. He was almost ready and in a pretty good mood, having slept well before such a difficult task. When Li peered through the hole that Lu Chen had made last night, he saw Lu Xing, who was already ready to go. He was expecting to see anyone, but definitely not the Starosta, but Lu grabbed his hand with a smile. She was the one who was instructed by the teacher to escort Li Su to the underground city. Later, they went out into the courtyard and moved forward. Lu Xing said that the martial arts university was preparing for a possible famine. This year, a new method of entrance exams for monster hunting was introduced, which she should familiarize herself with a little in advance. But she heard it from her father, and everyone else does not know this information. However, the underground city was much more dangerous than they both thought, and he warned her not to cry if they got into any trouble. But Lu Xing folded her arms across her chest, and it was unclear which of the two would ask to go home first. The guy was already fully prepared and determined to go, but in the wrong direction, so Lu Xing stopped him, showing him the right way. A few hours later, they were there. Lu Xing still assuring us that she was not scared at all. It was a normal physiological reaction, and Li played along, telling her to hold on to him. The girl grabbed his hand while they stood at the gate to the real hell. It was too close, and Li himself was not very comfortable being here. These gates looked both majestic and eerie, but they definitely did not want to go in. The gate to the underground city, over which dark clouds hung and red lightning flashed, and there were guards standing near the entrance who did not like their job at all. They picked up a cigarette and smoked. No one was allowed to enter the underground city. They had to do this work, even though they were paid very little for it. The other guards, who were a little higher up and had binoculars, told everyone that someone was approaching the gate and raised the alarm. They saw the two students and laughingly said that the couple had come to the wrong place for their date. It seems that today they are lucky and that their work will not be as boring as on other days. They took up their weapons, shouting for the uninvited guests to leave. After that, each of them jumped to the ground, and now everyone had to prepare for defense, although it would not be difficult because there were only two students to deal with. Lu Qing and Li Su had already reached the gate, so they asked louder if anyone was there and asked to open the door. But no one opened this door for them. Instead, they saw only a few armed men who definitely did not come here just to talk. They landed very close to Li and Lu Xing. Their leader ordered everyone to get on alert and prepare for an attack, or so it sounded. But they just stood next to each other and smilingly called themselves a group of 4 watchmen, which actually looked a little funny. But the students noticed that these 4 did not look very nice and kind. In order to get into the underground city, they had to show their strength. Li blocked Lu Xing with his hand as the guards began to approach. The guy pulled the black card out of his pocket, which Lu Chen had given him. The next moment, he activated the security system. Of course, the card he got was useless and unlikely to work, but who knows? It was worth a try. It alerted their leader a bit, and very soon this card flew into his forehead and knocked the man down. This angered them all, and one approached the leader, who had fallen to the ground, and the others gathered to take revenge for him. Lu Heng quietly said that with his skills, Li definitely needs to study the art of concealed weapon, not just throw them. But Li still managed to wound the man well. He could speak, but there was a lot of blood on his face. And when he stood up and started shouting at them, his friends were very surprised because they thought he was dead. but the man demanded compensation for this serious injury. Lee was not going to give anything back. He didn't break any precious thing. It was just some bandit's head, so he wasn't even going to talk about compensation. But the guard turned his attention to the black card that had recently been in his head. At first, when he first read what was written there, he was not even ready to believe his eyes. And a moment later, he jumped to Lee and Lu Xing with her. He bowed and held the card up to Li Su's face, apologizing for such terrible behavior and saying that the gates would be opened immediately for such distinguished guests. After that, the man ran back and ordered the gate to be opened quickly. No one understood what was wrong with him at all, and Lee also thought he had gone crazy after being hit with that card. Maybe it was really because of this black card. Li Su remembered Lu Chen's word, which said that there would be no obstacles if he kept her to himself, which meant that these words were true. The gate was already open. It turns out that the Choron card is really that easy to use. The students calmly walked through the giant door, and the other members of the group asked why they should be let go so easily, but the wounded man replied that they had a black card. Every year, Director Wu Difa sent a few of his students here to strengthen their abilities here, and as far as he remembered, more than half of them became very powerful cultivators. The director had good intuition, but only one thing remained a mystery. They did not know why the director sent a student who was at the level of chi purification here this year. The underground city was full of life without punishment for crimes. It was a complete mess. The girl showed Li Su a hologram of the underground city and pointed out where the guild itself was, so they had to go to the center. Soon they got there, and it was a mess too, but it was very different from the rest of the city. There were a lot of people here, and Li didn't like the atmosphere in the air. He and Lu Xing approached the locals and showed them the black map, after which Li asked them where to go, because they were here for the first time and knew almost nothing. The consultant said that since they were black card holders, she had to take them to a special place and called them to follow her. The staff was surprised that such a young guy already had a Choron card. The guy was given a phone, and the director of UDEF called him. If Lee wants to survive here, he needs to adapt to the local rules and laws. He was not going to give any precise orders, and everything depended on Li Su himself. After the conversation, Lee was given his personal card to hold. He was registered and asked to go to the first Coliseum. When the girl said the last word, the students were very surprised. It was now clear that Su did not know anything about the guild's tests. All participants who have registered here for the first time must compete to improve their abilities. Of course, the monsters are not strong at the first test, so don't worry. Everything should work out. The girl consultants led him to the elevator, giving him clear directions to the Coliseum. They pressed the flight button when they were in the elevator. Lu Xing whispered along with him. They hadn't yet gotten used to the fact that all the floors led so deeply down, and one of the consultants told them that the deeper they went down, the more dangerous it became. So she emphasized that they should not walk alone because it could end very badly. In a few minutes, they were already there, right next to the Coliseum, wishing them good luck and telling them to be very careful. The boy's eyes rounded when he saw this picture in front of him. A man was fighting a monster in front of him. Both of them were already wounded, but they continued to fight. An unfamiliar man punched the beast, and it growled loudly at him. The audience was shouting for him to fight harder, because people had invested all their savings in this, and he couldn't just give up and lose. The screams were getting louder and louder, and the hall was not quieting down. And finally, the man delivered the fatal blow to the beast, putting the monster on the ground and smashing the floor. Dali won this fight. Everyone who bet on him got a good amount of money for it, and now that they had fully enjoyed this battle, people were looking forward to the appearance of a new player. The youngest black card holder was invited to the arena, and Su Li was to be the next to prove himself in the battle. Everyone was curious to see how the young boy would fight the monster. When the light fell on him and Lu Xing, he started to panic and worry a little. Li didn't expect his turn to come so soon. But to start with, the consultant said that black card holders have several privileges. He realized that it was definitely not the best one and took off his jacket. Lu Xing was worried about him and wished him success. Li may not have been completely sure that everything would go well, but he tried not to show that he was afraid, so he went to the battlefield. Everyone present was convinced that he must be extremely strong to have a black card at such a young age. At first, I should have introduced the participant who would be fighting, but it seemed like a mistake that he was at the stage of chi purification, probably a misunderstanding. A man sitting among the audience called Li a wimp. If Su had lost, he could have made a lot of money, and he was sure that the guy had stolen the black card and wanted to start the show as soon as possible. Lai remembered all his achievements. He had already competed with bridges, even killed some of them. They were not the weakest, so it calmed Li down a bit. Now there was nowhere to go. The monster was about to be released into the arena. This beast looked very angry and hungry, so everyone was quiet in anticipation of a fight. Lee did not understand why they decided to release this particular monster, but he did not show shock on his face. A wave of astonishment swept through the hall. Even someone who possessed a golden pill couldn't possibly have dealt with this monster, not to mention a person in the chi refining stage. The boy probably wouldn't have left here alive. Lu Xing kept her fingers crossed for him and hoped that he would win and live. He had been told earlier that the first test would be fairly easy and involve a weaker monster, but now he was being pitted against a beast that emitted super powerful energy. This creature had no weaknesses at all. The beast was simply invincible. It was written that a small wolf was to be brought into the arena, but no one understood why it turned out to be the king of wolves. It was on Elder Hua's instructions that the E-level monster was changed to an A-level beast, and she praised her charges for a job well done. Even if they did want to bring someone to justice, they would only need to clean up the information a bit and blame it on the system's shortcomings, of course, so that no one would guess that they were involved. Wolves belonged to the class of dogs, which meant that they attacked the victim rapidly and tore it apart. The fight was about to start right now. Li Su stood in front of his enemy, expecting something terrible, but he knew he had to win. The steel wolf was the first to attack, and now it remained to be seen whether Su Li would withstand at least his first blow. He had to make every effort, and he absolutely did not want to lose in the first test. So Su Li focused and concentrated all his strength to give a worthy fight to his opponent. For some time, nothing was visible on the battlefield except a flash of bright blue light. Only then did the audience see a shocking picture in front of them. Su Li's energy threw the steel wolf into the wall. The first row where people were sitting had already been injured, some even sitting in their own blood, and chaos had already been sown among the guests of the Colosseum. The host apologized and promised that they would soon provide the victims with everything they needed and find them new places. It was really extremely dangerous to sit in the front row. Many people were injured, some were right under the body of the steel wolf and begged for help. Lu King was almost going crazy with worry about Su Li, and the consultants praised him for his skill and strength. His energy really captivated many people. Even Lu Xing, who was at the stage of laying the foundation, was not completely sure that she could defeat such a strong monster. And Su Li, who was below her, did it in one blow. But before it was finished, the steel wolf got to its feet and started attacking again. The beast seemed to be in a furious rage, so Su Li again had to try very hard to fight it off the second time. The wolf began to run very fast in a circle. The creature wanted to confuse Su Li with its fast movements. He used his signature technique, the wolf's shadow. Now the boy did not know which of the wolf's bodies was real. There were 4 of them now, and he had no idea on whom to concentrate his energy. But there was no time for long deliberations, let alone excitement, so Su Li decided to follow a different plan. The guy was going to fight back and he was releasing his energy. The commentator was actively telling everything in the smallest detail. But in that case, he will kill everyone here. The 4 shadows created quickly and simultaneously approached Su Li. But over time, for unknown reasons, the steel wolf lost the ability to move, and many began to doubt that Li Su was in the period of chi purification. While everyone was arguing with each other, the boy caught a real wolf by its jaw, and it could not move at all in his hand. Su Li managed to knock down the steel wolf, which was a shock for everyone who saw the fight. It was something incredible, but Li only hoped that he would not have to pay compensation for the destroyed floor. The doctors tried very hard to bring the steel wolf back to life, but unfortunately, they failed. Now the commentator could safely announce the final results of this duel. In this test, Su Li won a complete victory, although he was doubted because of his chi purification performance, but he proved that it was in vain. And Lu Xing was jumping happily on the spot and rejoicing that the boy had won the battle, as he had promised to do evenly. Now we had to look at the trophies that Li Su had won, which were in the body of a wolf. The commentator used his own magic to get all the prizes, which turned out to be a piece of the A-level monster crystal, which was a good achievement for the first fight. This crystal was valued at a large sum of money, as much as 100 yuan, and others hoped that they would someday have such a wonderful opportunity to receive such a reward. But this guy, who was also wounded, was stopped immediately. This crystal appears only after killing a monster that is at level A. If he goes to battle, the maximum he can get is numerous injuries. The gem was given to Su Li, but for some reason he was very surprised that it now belonged to him. But those were the rules. All the prizes had to be taken by the participants, and the points were transferred to the guild's account. These points of the underground guild were the currency of the underground city. They could be exchanged for some things at any time. In this world, no one knew about the true value of a crystal, whether it was alchemy, cultivation, or inlaid tools. An extremely large number of such crystals were needed. The higher the quality of a gem, the more value and energy it contained. He had already started to imagine different possible life scenarios. Li Su could become the richest man in Wuji and live a wonderful life. In this case, if he competes with monsters in this arena every day, he can become a billionaire in just a few days. Lu Heng approached the dreamy boy and whispered quietly that she congratulated him on winning his first battle in the underground city and on the crystal he had received. But the guy was still completely in his dreams, and it seemed that he hadn't even heard her words. He had already thought everything through and knew what he was going to spend his millions on. The elder did not like this at all. He needed more men for the battle, and they were due to arrive soon. A few seconds later, a girl with clear intentions for Su Li was already standing outside the arena. She entered the arena and shouted that she wanted to fight with the boy. Li turned around. This only amused the commentator. It meant that the show was on. Su Li was challenged. The commentator shouted loudly to welcome back to the arena the owner of the black card and the man who had easily defeated the monster at level A. Now he had to emerge victorious from another challenge. Su Li was convinced that this girl had come here for the crystal from the A-level monster. A participant who was in the Qi purification period today would definitely remain in the public's memory for a long time. The two female consultants were asking him to accept this challenge, but Lu Xing didn't understand what this whole circus was for. If Li Su had just defeated a monster of such a high level, this challenge sounded pointless now. But in general, the guy had no choice anyway. Everyone who entered the Colosseum has no right to refuse the challenge. Never. So he had to enter the arena for the second time anyway. This was one of the main rules of the Underground Guild. Li Su thought that for a place like this, there were too many rules, and very strange ones at that. However, he was not completely against another battle. The guy wanted to show his class in the arena again in front of the audience he had enthralled. So Li reassured Lu Xing and decided to accept the challenge. In a moment, he was standing in front of his opponent, the light was falling on them both, and the two were ready for a hard battle in which no one knows the limits of cruelty. He noticed a very familiar tattoo on the girl's stomach. It was the symbol of the Order of the Jormungand, so it turns out that they are not finished yet. There were no rules, no taboos, no time limits. All they had to do was overcome their opponent and emerge victorious from the battle. The winner can receive any reward from the competitor, including life. Hen Li Su noticed the weapon in the girl's hands. He began to worry more, because he had nothing on him but his own hand. However, an elder who was watching from a secret room admitted that Li Su was the most amazing person he had ever met. The only pity is that the guy decided to become their enemy, not their ally, in which case we could only wish him to stay in this underground city forever. Meanwhile, the girl had already begun to attack Su Li, who was completely confused. He remembered that the rules prohibited the use of weapons. But the girl from the Jormungand Order did not listen to him. She just kept moving closer to him and waving her knife more actively. That wasn't all she had. She had special gloves with claws, so she was going to use them to hurt her enemy more. The guy was dodging as best he could, but he couldn't attack her first. He was just running away from the blows, not fighting. But to her great surprise, the boy was able to block the next blow, and all the shrapnel fell to the ground. All she managed to do was tear his clothes, but no scratches were visible on Su Li's body. Luckily, teacher Lu Chen gave him the necessary attribute. If not for them, nothing would have worked out. The boy remembered her words about the chainmail and was glad he had it with him. But the fact that his clothes were torn irritated the guy. It seemed that this strange stranger did not know the rules of martial arts, since she was behaving so terribly in the arena. She was sure that she would seriously wound him with this weapon, but it didn't work. The plan failed. Every time the Jormungand Order attacked, their men often could not do anything, even though they were strong opponents. But if you can find the right tactics and strategy, you can easily defeat them. So the guy started fighting with all his might. He knew that there was no other way out but to win. Once again, Li Su managed to throw his enemy away from him in the first minutes of the fight. He killed her with a single blow, and she was lying in a pool of blood and debris from the destroyed arena floor. Some of the spectators had been going to the Colosseum for more than 6 months, but they had never seen anyone kill their opponent with a single blow, especially if they had a worthy opponent. It's a good thing she lost, because otherwise he would have gotten a lot of punishment. This guy was so excited about it that he lost his pants. The commentator went over to the girl. She was not just unconscious, her heart had already stopped. In that case, Su Li takes the victory for herself again. It was such a magical moment, so we had to congratulate the guy on his victory, and the audience started clapping. And Lu Xing's joy knew no bounds. She jumped up and down again, exclaiming that he was the best. According to the rules of the guild, a guy could take one item from a competitor. But before that, the man warned that since no one had notified them about the weapon, it would be considered invalid, and she had no other items on her, so Li Su transferred all her points to his own account. He scored thousands of points in one day, which was really a lot of money. The elder was furious. He was sure that Li Su would not be left alive after this battle, but he had just killed the opponent who was at the stage of laying the foundation, and so easily, with just one blow. He clutched the red seal in his hands in anger. After that, he released it, and it took off in the air. They contacted their allies and told them that Su Li should definitely not be left unattended. He was a serious enemy for them all. The voice on the other end assured me that I could rely on him, and that this would definitely not happen again. Su Li would be destroyed in the near future. The elder was confident in this man, because he had never let him down. While the man in the cloak was watching the boy, he ordered to send a message to a number. Tonight, they were all supposed to gather at the old place, just like before. Li approached Lu Xing and said that they needed to get out of here immediately. This place was too dangerous, and the guy looked very worried. He explained that the opponent he had just fought was from Jormungand, and the girl was also uncomfortable. And this person did not look like an ordinary person who came just to earn points. It seems that his goal was Li Su himself, or rather, to kill him. It's very dangerous in this city, so you have to be very careful while they are here. Later, they got off the elevator, and Lu Xing noticed that each floor of the underground guild was designed as different functional partitions, and Li Su just wanted to get to his rooms faster, so he pulled her along. Their rooms were right next to each other. Li Su said that if anything happened, she could call him at any time, but she knew he was very tired after fighting the monsters and that girl. And when she went out the door, she said in a quieter voice that he looked very handsome today, and then blushed. Li Su was also embarrassed and broke the door handle, barely saying anything to her, and wishing her good night. After that, he quickly ran into his room and locked the door to make it safe. He knew he had to tell Director Wu Def about the meeting with the Jormungand group member as soon as possible, so he picked up his phone and dialed his number, in case they had thought of a new plan again. The principal was still at the school, even though it was late, and he was very surprised to receive a call at this hour. But when he picked up the phone, he recognized Su Li's voice, and he wasted no time in reporting that he had met with a member of the Jormungand today. The first thing he asked Def was about their health. He was really worried about his students, so he asked if there were any injuries. Li Su said that he had even competed against her, but assured her that he and Lu Xing were fine. They were now resting in their rooms, and the director now faced a new question about Jormungand and their presence in the underground city. Wu Difa said he would look into it and told his students to be very careful and call him immediately if necessary. When they talked, the thought of the Jormungand order in the underground city did not give the director peace of mind. It alarmed him. So he decided to call the law enforcement bureau as soon as possible. There was a lot of noise there, even though it was late at night and they were dealing with the lawbreaker, and the principal of Kaiyuan School, Wu Dif, was answered by one of the consultants. He immediately asked how the investigation into the invasion of their school by the Jormungand order was going, but the girl calmly replied that they had not received any reports of an invasion of the Kaiyuan school. The director was precipitated. It couldn't be true, because even their head came to see them to make sure. While the girl was doing her nails, the director said that a few days ago, her people had taken the bodies of the murdered members of Jormungand to their place, and at one point she dropped the brush, which painted her fingers red. She raised her tone and could confidently say that they had not received any notification about Jormungand. The bureau was not aware of these events at all, and she asked the director to calm down, and added that they had no bodies either. He didn't understand anything at all in Def. He had observed this situation with his own eyes, and here he was told completely opposite things. And while they were talking, the elder was already at the meeting place they had previously agreed on. Two people in black cloaks met and greeted each other. They really hadn't seen each other for a long time. A man in a gray business suit brought a surprise for his ally. When he took the lid off the coffins, there were the bodies of two Jormungand members, Liang Yanggi and Aoma. Liang Yangui was strapped to the coffin. It was strange to see him dead, knowing that an ordinary student had killed the representative of the Golden Pill. Aoma was also strapped to the coffin, but besides that, the man had something else to tell. A strange person hiding his face under a black cloak approached an interesting specimen for his experiments, and then the man asked what he wanted. He had to get rid of one person. It was strange to hear him say that. This person had to do a lot of bad things if he was opposing him personally. Despite the fact that the subject to be killed is only at the stage of chi purification, he has defeated the Golden Pill representative, so he should not be underestimated. He was interested in this proposal. Huolao didn't care what purposes Su Li would be used for later, but he must never leave the underground city alive.